Tonight's stories are calm and easy to listen to, told slowly beneath the sound of steady rain. There's a gentle darkness here, familiar and unhurried. Everything continues quietly if you drift off. Story 1, Unseen Tenants, Secrets of Room 213. The air conditioning rattled in the ceiling vent, a low, uneven hum that sounded more like a warning than a comfort. I glanced at the clock. 2:30. The lobby was empty, save for the occasional buzz of a fluorescent tube overhead that threatened to die at any moment. Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and quick, breaking the silence like a sudden cough. I leaned back in my creaky chair, the vinyl squeaking beneath me. I tasted the bitterness of stale coffee lingering on my tongue, and the lingering scent of something faintly burnt, maybe a cigarette, or the remnants of last night's careless breakfast. It was supposed to be a straightforward job. Just me, the night shift, a handful of rooms to manage, and a handful of travelers passing through. I'd done this before, worked overnight in places that felt like they'd been forgotten by time and mercy. But this motel had a different kind of weight to it, like the walls were holding their breath. I could almost feel the tired eyes of the building watching me back, waiting to see if I'd make a mistake. That was the thing. Mistakes here didn't just mean a missed reservation. They meant slipping into something darker, something invisible but heavy. I'd noticed it first on my second week, the way the other staff acted when certain guests checked in. Not all of them, just a few. The ones who never got a name badge, or whose rooms never appeared on the daily report. I thought maybe it was an error, a glitch in the system. But the silence around those guests was unnerving. The night clerk who trained me, a thin woman named Marla, had a habit of avoiding their names altogether. If I asked about them, she'd change the subject or stare at me like I'd asked something ridiculous, like I was the one who didn't belong. That kind of silence. Cold. Sharp. I'd try to pin it down, figure out what was going on, but the motel's faded charm was a labyrinth. The peeling wallpaper flaked under my fingertips when I absent-mindedly touched it, the rough plaster beneath uneven and cracked. The hallway smelled of a mix of cleaning products and something else, something faintly metallic and sour that I couldn't place. Maybe it was the old pipes groaning somewhere behind the walls, or the remnants of last week's rain seeping through the foundation. Tonight, there was a new guest. I remembered because he arrived just after midnight, a man in a rumpled suit carrying a battered briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. His eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone who looked that tired. He asked for a room on the second floor, and I gave him 213, the one with the peeling wallpaper and the flickering light bulb in the bathroom. I thought nothing of it at the time. Later, while I was restocking the coffee cups behind the desk, I caught Marla talking quietly with the maintenance guy, their voices low and hurried. They stopped abruptly when I turned the corner, and the silence that followed was heavier than the thick, stale air. I caught a glimpse of a clipboard in Marla's hand, some kind of log, but the pages she flipped through were blank for room 213. No name, no entry, nothing. I shrugged it off, telling myself maybe it was just an oversight. But then, when I called out a routine check-in for housekeeping on that floor over the radio, there was no response. Nothing. The radio crackled and spat static, but no answer. I walked the hallway myself, each step echoed oddly, like the building was hollow underneath. Outside room 213, the door was shut tight, no light beneath the crack, no sound. I knocked softly, expecting maybe a grumpy guest or a polite refusal to answer at this hour. No reply. I hesitated, the rough plaster against my palm grounding me in the moment. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. The air felt colder here, despite the ever-warm summer night pressing against the windows. The faint smell of damp carpet rose, mixed with something else, something like old sweat and forgotten secrets. I stepped back and radioed housekeeping again. Still nothing. Back at the desk, I pulled up the guest list. Number 213. The screen blinked, showing only the standard names I'd seen during my shifts. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. No trace at all. That's when I realized I might be the only one who knew he was here. I swallowed hard, the stale coffee bitter and thick at the back of my throat. I wanted to ask Marla, or the night manager, someone. But the look they'd given me before, the frozen smile, the quick change of subject made me hesitate. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what the silence meant. It felt like a warning. Not just to me, but to anyone who might ask too many questions. Sometimes, I wondered if the motel itself was a kind of trap, an old beast that swallowed people whole and spat out only shadows. The flickering lights, the peeling walls, the stale, cold air conditioning, it was all part of the same quiet menace. That night, as I sat back down and stared at the empty lobby, my hands trembling just a little, I knew I'd crossed some invisible line. And the silence that followed was colder than any night air I'd ever felt. The lobby clock ticked past 3, the thin, mechanical roar of its gears nearly drowning beneath the hum of the dying fluorescent bulbs overhead. I kept turning the name over in my head, the one I'd seen disappear from every digital ledger and whispered conversation. Not just erased. Obliterated. Like he'd never existed. The more I stared at the blank screen where his reservation should have been, the heavier the silence pressed into my chest. I wanted to ask Marla again. Or the night manager, whoever that was. But that frozen smile, their swift, almost rehearsed change of subject the last time I brought it up. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what kind of trap I was stepping into. Still, I couldn't let it go. Something about the way the staff tiptoed around those names, those guests, felt like a warning. Not just to me. To anyone who might pry too much. I pushed myself up and wandered toward the back office. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and the faint, sour tang of mildew. The flickering light above buzzed unevenly, casting jittery shadows that made the peeling wallpaper look like it was breathing. I ran a hand along the rough plaster wall, feeling the grit and cracks scrape my fingers. The motel was tired, old in a way that wasn't charming or quaint. It was weary. Like it wanted to forget. In the office, Marla sat behind a cluttered desk, her fingers wrapped tightly around a worn mug. She looked up as I entered, eyes narrowing just slightly. I swallowed the urge to blurt out my questions all at once. Marla, I started, voice low. Last night, I saw a name, someone who stayed here but isn't in the records anymore. I looked again today. Nothing. No trace. She didn't answer right away. Just set the mug down, the clink of ceramic on what's sounding unusually loud in the stillness. Then she said, "You're not supposed to see that." Her words chilled me more than the stale air blowing through the cracked window. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the door, then back at me. Her voice dropped to a whisper, though we were alone. "There are people who come through here. People who don't stay. Not really. They don't exist in the usual way. It's better if you don't ask." I blinked, trying to make sense of what she'd said. Not exist? Marla, I don't follow. She shook her head, a bitter smile twisting her lips. Look, I don't know the whole story. But I do know this place isn't just a rundown motel. It's a crossroads, a kind of. Holding pen. People come and go, but some are erased. Not by magic or ghosts. By people. By rules. And if you start poking around, you might find yourself on the wrong side of those rules. The room seemed to close in on me. The dust motes danced in the weak light, and the faint hum of the air conditioner stuttered, as if uncertain whether to keep running. I wanted to press her, but something in Marla's expression, a mixture of fatigue and fear, stopped me. Why? I asked finally. Why erase them? Who decides? She shrugged, then leaned in, eyes sharp now, dangerous even. That's not for us to know. The fewer questions, the better. You want to keep your job? Stay out of it. I nodded, but my mind was already racing. If these guests were being wiped from every record, every conversation, what was really happening here? And how deep did it go? Later, as the first hints of dawn crept through the grimy curtains, I found myself back at the front desk, sifting through the old paper logbooks no one seemed to use anymore. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with scribbled names and dates, crossed out entries, and unexplained gaps. A pattern emerged. Certain names appeared for a single night, then vanished without a trace, no matter how many times I checked. I jotted down a few, my hand trembling slightly. The air smelled faintly of mildew and stale cigarettes, and the faint clatter of distant footsteps echoed from the hallway. But the motel was supposed to be empty. I looked up, heart tightening. A thin shadow flickered just beyond the glass doors, barely noticeable in the early light. Someone was there. Watching. Or maybe just passing through. I told myself it was nothing. A delivery driver. A stray cat. But the feeling didn't ease. Over the next few days, I started to observe the staff more closely. Marla avoided eye contact, her smiles never quite reaching her eyes. The night manager, a gaunt man named Ellis, moved with a quiet urgency, answering questions with curt nods and averted gazes. Even the cleaning crew seemed to whisper about things I couldn't hear, their conversation stopping abruptly when I approached. One evening, I caught Ellis speaking on the phone in the dim hallway, his voice low and clipped. They're asking questions again. The new guy's digging. We need to handle it. He paused, listening. No, not with him. We can't have anyone else knowing. My breath caught, and I backed away before he noticed. That night, I lay awake in the cracked motel bed, the thin blanket doing little against the chill that crept under my skin. The air conditioning rattled unevenly, and somewhere outside, the stray dog barked again, sharp, urgent, like a warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something far bigger than missing guests or erased names. There was a system here, a methodical erasure that went beyond paperwork, something human, deliberate, and cold. The silence wasn't just absence. It was control. I wondered how far they'd go to keep it that way. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Instead, a new name appeared on the list, a name I recognized. One of the erased. And now, it was back, right there in black and white. But the note beside it was different. Handwritten. Sharp and hurried. Watch him. I swallowed hard. The stale coffee I'd brewed tasted metallic this time. I was the next guest in line. The metallic taste lingered on my tongue long after I set the coffee cup down, a bitter reminder that nothing about this motel was normal. I stared at the note again, the hurried scrawl beneath the typed name stabbing at me. Watch him. The name wasn't just familiar, it was personal. I'd crossed paths with this guy before, though I couldn't quite place where. Somewhere in town, maybe? The kind of name you don't forget easily. I ran a hand over the cracked plaster wall behind the desk. The rough texture scraped under my fingertips, grounding me just enough to stop my thoughts from spiraling. The air conditioning still rattled, uneven and threatening to give out any second. Outside, the stray dog barked again, more distant this time, but no less urgent. It was like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting. I knew I couldn't ignore the note or the name. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about missing guests or erased records anymore. It was a warning, a threat, and maybe a trap. I forced myself to keep working, but every few minutes, my eyes darted back to the list. New names appeared, some clean, some scratched out in pen. The staff moved silently around me, their faces unreadable, their eyes avoiding mine like I carried something contagious. I caught Mr. Haller glancing my way once, but he quickly turned, lips pressed into a thin line. At some point, the night shifted. The sun didn't rise, but the shadows in the hallways grew longer, deeper. The fluorescent bulbs flickered with more urgency, casting uneven pools of light on the faded carpet. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. "Did you see the note?" It was Lisa, the only other overnight worker I half trusted. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the lobby with nervous energy. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah. Who's him?" She looked around, then leaned closer. "That guy? He's trouble. Real trouble. Not the kind you kick out for being drunk or loud. Something else." Her voice dropped further. "The kind that makes people disappear." I swallowed again. "Disappear? You mean like the erased ones?" Lisa's jaw tightened. "Exactly. And the way they disappear, it's not accidents or bad luck. It's deliberate. The staff here? They don't talk about it because talking means risk. You say the wrong thing, you get erased too." I wanted to laugh, but the lump in my throat stopped me. Erased? Like, completely? Gone. From records, from memory. Like they never existed. And no one asks why. No one wants to know. Her eyes flicked to the hallway as if the walls themselves might listen. "I've seen it happen. Heard it. You want to stay here, you keep your mouth shut." The weight of her words pressed down on me. I glanced around the lobby, the peeling wallpaper, the faded reception sign, the cheap plastic chair where guests sometimes waited. This wasn't just a rundown motel with bad management. It was a cage, silent and suffocating. I thought about leaving. Just walking out the front door and never looking back. But the note, the names, the way the staff moved around me like I was already tainted, it wasn't that simple anymore. I'd crossed a line. There was no going back. Lisa hesitated, then said, "You need to know something else. About the guy on the list. He's not just a guest. He's involved with them." Her words hit me like a cold splash. "With who?" She shook her head, voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "The people who run this place. The ones who erase. He's not a victim. He's part of the machinery." I stared at her. "You mean he's one of them?" She nodded. "And they want you to watch him because they don't trust him. Or maybe because they want you gone if you get too close." A sudden noise, a door slamming somewhere down the hall, made us both jump. Lisa glanced toward the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones, face pale. "You shouldn't be here talking about this." I felt the room close in, the stale air thickening. I swallowed again, the metallic bitterness now crawling into the back of my throat. "What happens if I don't leave?" She met my eyes, steady and cold. "Then you disappear." The word hung between us, heavier than the humid night. I thought about the missing guests, the erased names, the silence that followed every question. They weren't just hiding something. They were protecting it with everything they had. I wanted to ask more, but the front door opened suddenly, the bell jangling sharply. A man stepped inside, tall, lean, with a face half hidden in shadow. My breath caught. It was him. The one with the handwritten note. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "Stay behind me." He walked straight to the desk, his gaze locking on mine with an unsettling calm. The air shifted, colder now, like the temperature dropped a few degrees with his presence. The stray dog barked again, faint but persistent. "Looking for a room," he said, voice smooth but edged like broken glass. I nodded mutely, unable to tear my eyes away. I wanted to warn Lisa, to run, but the words stuck in my throat. The note was clear. Watch him. But I didn't know if I was watching a predator or a victim. The man slid a crumpled bill across the counter. "Keep the change." As he turned away, the flickering light overhead suddenly went out, plunging the lobby into a thick, swallowing darkness. The emergency bulbs kicked in, but their weak orange glow barely kept the shadows at bay. I swallowed, heart hammering. The point of no return was here. I was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. And whatever came next, there was no turning back. The weak orange glow from the emergency bulbs barely cut through the thick gloom that had swallowed the lobby. He stopped just short of the door to room 7, the one I'd noted earlier on the list where guests seemed to vanish without a trace. The flickering overhead light buzzed and sputtered before giving out entirely, leaving us in a dim pool of darkness edged by the dull emergency glow. The stray dog barked again, low and persistent, somewhere outside. It was a sound that didn't belong in this building, or maybe anywhere at all. It put a raw edge on the quiet. "Room 7, he said, voice low but clear, almost a murmur against the hum of the air, cold and heavy with silence conditioner struggling to stay alive. "That's where I'm staying." Lisa's jaw clenched. "We don't have any check-ins for you," she said, voice tight, barely masking the tremor. "No record here." His eyes flicked toward her, a flash of something unreadable. "You don't keep proper records then." There was no anger, only a cold, almost clinical detachment. "I'm just here for the night." I wanted to step forward, to demand more, but my throat had gone dry. Instead, I watched as Lisa's hand twitched toward the phone behind the desk. She didn't reach it. Something in the man's gaze stopped her. The silence stretched. It felt like a challenge. And then he smiled. Not the kind you welcome, but the kind that unsettles, the kind that says he's 3 moves ahead in a game you haven't even learned the rules of yet. "Look," he said, voice dropping lower. "I don't want trouble. I just want a room. But I know what you're doing here." His eyes locked on mine now, and I could feel the weight of them, sharp and accusing. "Erasing people is messy. It leaves traces. You can't hide forever." Lisa's face went pale, the color draining like water from a cracked vase. She whispered, "You don't know what you're talking about." I could feel the tension rising, thick enough to choke on. My hands trembled on the desk, fingernails digging into the wood grain, rough and splintered. The air conditioning clicked loudly as it cycled on again, blowing a cold draft that crept under my jacket and raised the hairs on my neck. "Why do you care?" Lisa demanded, voice cracking. "Why do you want to dig into something that's none of your business?" He shrugged, slow and deliberate. "I've seen what happens to people here. The ones who get erased. It's not just about missing records or quiet conversations. There's fear. Real fear. And that fear is contagious." The lobby felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. I could smell the faint odor of mildew mixed with old carpet and something metallic like blood or rusted iron. It made my stomach twist. I glanced at Lisa. She was staring at the man, eyes wide but defiant. "You think you can just waltz in here and expose everything?" she spat. "You don't know the consequences." The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Try me." Suddenly, the lights overhead flickered back on, harsh and unforgiving. The man took a step forward, and Lisa's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "Stay behind me," she whispered, voice taut. I nodded, heart hammering louder than the buzzing fluorescence. The man's gaze flicked around the room, calculating, like he was weighing whether to make a move or disappear into the shadows. Then, his eyes settled back on me. "You're not just some bystander, are you?" he said softly. "You've been watching. Listening. You want to know what happens to the missing guests." I swallowed, unable to speak. I wanted to deny it. But the truth was there, raw and undeniable. I had noticed the erased names, the silences, the cold looks exchanged whenever the subject came close. "How deep do you want to go?" he asked. "Because once you pull on this thread, there's no turning back." Lisa's grip on my arm tightened. "You don't understand what you're getting into," she said, voice low but fierce. "It isn't just about records or guests. This place. It's a trap." "A trap for what?" I pressed, voice cracking under the weight of everything. He shook his head slowly. "For anyone who sticks their nose where it doesn't belong." The stray dog barked again, louder this time, followed by the distant echo of a door slamming somewhere down the hall. I jumped, the sudden noise breaking the tense silence like a dropped glass. "You should leave," Lisa said, pulling at my sleeve. "Now!" But I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the floor, the cold seeping through my shoes, anchoring me in place. The man stepped closer, the flickering light casting strange shadows across his face. "There's a reason the staff erases people from the records," he said quietly. "Because those people have something that belongs here. Something the motel needs. And once it's taken, they disappear." I blinked, trying to make sense of the words. The stale air felt thicker, harder to breathe. "What do you mean, something the motel needs?" I asked, voice barely audible. He glanced toward the dim hallway beyond the lobby. "You think it's just a rundown building with flickering lights and bad wiring?" "No. It's a business. A very specific kind of business. And it thrives on people who come here and stay too long." Lisa's breath hitched. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" The man's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the room like an item. "Look around. Ask yourself why no one ever talks about what happens to those guests. Why the staff refuses to acknowledge them. Because if they did, the whole operation would fall apart." I could taste copper on my tongue, the metallic tang of fear or adrenaline. My head spun with questions, doubts, and a creeping sense of helplessness. Lisa suddenly turned toward the back office. "I'm going to call the manager," she said, a note of desperation creeping in. "Maybe he can explain." The night had stretched itself thin, like old fabric worn at the edges. I stood behind the front desk, the faint hum of the air conditioner mingling with the distant creak of the motel's sagging floorboards. Outside, the streetlight flickered in a rhythm that made the shadows dance like restless ghosts. I glanced at the empty guest ledger, the pages deliberately blank where I knew names should have been. It was time to confront the silence. I found Marla in the break room. She was leaning against the counter, her eyes fixed on the flickering fluorescent light overhead, her fingers nervously drumming on the chipped formica. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried not to let my voice shake. "Marla, we need to talk. About the guests, those who don't appear in the records." She didn't look up. "You mean the ones we don't talk about?" "Exactly." "Why? What's going on here?" "I've been here weeks, and it's like there's this whole other layer of reality I'm not supposed to see." My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. She sighed, a sound heavy with years of exhaustion and something darker I couldn't name. "You're not wrong to notice. It's not just the paperwork. It's the silence, the way everyone pretends. It's complicated. Complicated was a soft word for the cold pit twisting in my stomach. Look, she said, finally meeting my gaze, we're dealing with something that doesn't fit any normal rules. The motel's been around a long time, longer than any of us care to admit. Some people come here for reasons they don't want anyone to know. Or maybe they're running from something worse than the night itself. I took a breath, tasting the stale coffee lingering in the air. Running from what? Who? She shook her head. That's the thing. Nobody talks about it openly. The management insists on erasing those guests from every record, every conversation. It's like acknowledging them gives them power. Or maybe it just makes the nightmare real. I frowned. Nightmare? She hesitated, then said, the motel isn't just a place to sleep. It's a trap. For some, a refuge. For others, something else entirely. People come here and vanish, not physically, but in every way that matters. Their names, their stories, their existence. Like they were never here. A cold draft swept through the room as the AC kicked on full blast. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how thin my jacket was against the chill. I thought I was imagining it. The way the other staff just erased them. The way you all don't speak their names. Marla's voice dropped. You're not. It's a shared understanding. A pact of silence. Because if you break it, the whole place shifts. Things get dangerous. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the empty parking lot where the cracked asphalt seemed to ripple beneath the flickering streetlights. Dangerous how? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I kept this. A name, a date, a room number. It's proof, but it's useless if I don't have someone who understands. I looked down at the ink, smudged and faded but still legible. A name I recognized from the stories I'd overheard in whispers, the ones erased from every ledger. You're risking a lot showing me this. Her laugh was hollow. At this point, risking is all I have left. The hours slipped by as we pieced together the fragments of what the motel really was. A place where people came to hide or to disappear. The staff were not accomplices but prisoners in their own way, bound by fear and unspoken rules. The erasure was a twisted form of protection, a way to keep the darkness at bay by not giving it substance. I felt my resolve harden. I couldn't walk away, not now that I knew. But the question that gnawed at me was whether I was brave or foolish to stay. Later, when the first gray fingers of dawn stretched across the sky, I sat alone in the lobby. The world outside was waking, oblivious to the secrets trapped within peeling wallpaper and buzzing fluorescent lights. I felt a strange kinship with the erased guests, those invisible figures who haunted the margins of this place. I made a decision. I would document everything. Not on official ledgers, not in whispered conversations, but in my own words. Names, dates, details. I'd give them back their stories, even if the motel tried to swallow them again. As the sun rose, the stale air seemed less suffocating. The weight on my chest eased just a little. I knew the motel wouldn't change overnight. The silence would still be there, thick and cold. But I had found a crack in it, a way to push back. Walking out through the lobby doors, I felt the rough plaster of the walls beneath my fingers, the faint scent of mildew and old carpet filling my nostrils. For the first time in weeks, I didn't look back. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was a keeper of truth, however fragile. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Story 2, Desert Motel of the Vanished, Isolation and Unease. The desert was a dry sigh under the early evening sky, like the land itself had given up on trying to hold on to anything alive. I pulled in slowly. The gravel crunched under my tires, loud in the desert stillness. The place looked like it had been forgotten, or maybe just waiting. A long, low building with peeling paint and a handful of parked cars, none of them moving. A wind stirred up dust that felt like fine grit in my mouth. I shut off the engine and sat for a moment, listening. Silence. Complete silence. No voices, no music, no hum of life except for the faint buzz of the flickering sign. The lobby door was glass, smudged, and I could see a man behind the counter. He was middle-aged, maybe late 40s, with a face that didn't quite match the tiredness in his eyes. He looked up as I approached, and a small, calm smile spread across his lips. "Evening," he said, voice low and easy. "Hi. Do you have a room?" I kept my voice casual, but it was a little rough from the dry air and too much talking earlier. He nodded, folding his hands in front of him on the counter. "We do. Last few guests just checked out." He glanced behind me, as if expecting someone to be standing there. Quite sudden, though. Not the usual. I blinked. Everyone left? Just like that? Yeah. He shrugged, but it wasn't a shrug that meant no big deal. More like one trying to shrug off a memory. Something about the heat, maybe. Or the road we're coming through. Folks get antsy. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and something faintly chemical, like the cleaner someone used to keep the place from smelling worse. The air was thick but cool from an ancient air conditioner that rattled in the corner. I noticed a small clock on the wall ticking loudly, each second dragging out, making the silence feel heavier. I reached into my pocket, counting the crisp bills I'd pulled out earlier. "I'll take a room." He smiled again, but this time it was slower, more deliberate. "Good choice. You'll be safer here than out on the road at night." His eyes held mine a moment longer than felt comfortable. "Especially tonight." I hesitated. "Why?" "What do you mean?" The man's smile didn't falter. "Nothing to worry about. Just. Some folks have a hard time driving in the dark out here. The desert plays tricks, you know? Shadows, heat mirages. Things that make you see what ain't there." I nodded, but my throat tightened. I didn't like the way he said it, like he was trying to warn me without saying anything directly. I told myself I was just tired, maybe seeing things where there were none. Still, I found myself scanning the parking lot through the grimy window. Not a soul in sight. He handed me a key on a simple metal ring. "Room 7, down the hall to the left. If you need anything, just come back here." The hallway smelled of old carpet, faintly musty with a hint of something I couldn't place. The walls were rough plaster, cracked near the baseboards, and the lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows. The room was small but clean enough, a bed with a thin blanket, a small dresser, and a window facing out toward the desert. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress creaking under me. Outside, the sun dipped lower, and the desert swallowed the light quickly. The temperature dropped, but the air, cold and heavy with silence, still held the dust and dryness that made my skin itch. I pulled my phone out to check the signal. 1 bar. Not great, but enough to send a text or two. I sent a quick message to my sister, made it to the motel. Weirdly quiet here. No reply. I didn't expect one right away, but the silence in the room suddenly felt heavier. Then I heard it. A soft tapping. Not from inside the room. From outside, somewhere near the window. I stood up, heart suddenly thudding in a way that didn't feel like exhaustion. The desert wind had picked up, rattling the loose screen. I pressed my ear against the glass. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, telling myself it was just a branch, or maybe a bird. But the tapping came again, softer this time, deliberate. I stepped back from the window and looked out into the darkening desert. The parking lot was empty, the cars still, the shadows long and still. I sat back down, hands trembling slightly. The man at the desk had said the other guests left suddenly. Why? And why did the night clerk seem so calm about it? Too calm. Like he knew something I didn't. I tried to shake off the unease. Just a motel. Just a stop on a long road. But the night was settling in, and with it, a quiet that felt like something waiting. Waiting for me to move, to make a mistake. Outside, a dog barked somewhere far away, sharp and lonely. The tapping stopped. I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay or leave. But the road back to the highway was dark, and the thought of driving blind terrified me more than this strange, empty motel. So I stayed. For now. The night deepened like ink pouring into the desert sky, thick and suffocating. I glanced toward the night clerk again. He was still behind the desk, his posture relaxed, fingers laced together, eyes calm but unreadable. The flickering fluorescent light above him cast a sickly glow that made the shadows under his jaw deepen. I caught myself wondering if he had been sitting there all day, watching, waiting. His silence was a weight in the empty lobby. I don't understand, I said, voice a bit too loud in the stillness. Why did everyone leave? So suddenly? He looked up slowly, as if the question had been asked 1,000 times and yet still held some amusement. They had their reasons. Nothing you need to worry about. That calmness, too smooth, too practiced, made my skin crawl. But it's not normal for a full motel to empty out overnight. Not without a word. He gave a faint shrug, tapping a pen against a pad of paper. The sound was sharp, deliberate. People get nervous. Sometimes things happen out here you wouldn't expect. Best to move on. I swallowed hard, eyes flicking back to the empty rows of rooms visible through the front window. Each one a little square of darkness, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The desert wind shifted outside, carrying the faint scent of dry sage and something else, something metallic and sharp. My throat tightened. Can I see the room, with its faint smell of dust and decays? I asked, voice quieter now. Just to check something. No need, he said quickly. There's nobody left. No reason to bother. But I could tell from the way his fingers clenched the pen that he didn't want me poking around. I stared a moment longer, then stood up, the chair scraping against the cracked linoleum. The hum under my feet grew louder, almost like a low vibration in the walls. Look, I said, trying to keep my tone steady, I just need a place to rest. I promise I'm not going to cause trouble. He smiled then, a slow, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're welcome to stay. Just don't wonder. It's safer that way. His words sent a chill skittering down my spine. Safer. Safer from what? I wanted to ask, but the question caught in my throat. Instead, I walked toward the door that led to the hallway. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of old carpet and something faintly sour, maybe mildew. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the rough plaster, uneven and cracked, like the building itself was fracturing under some hidden pressure. I stepped into the hall. The lights flickered intermittently, throwing the long corridor into fits of shadow and light. The silence was absolute, except for the distant creak of the building settling, or was it something else? A soft scrape, maybe, like fingernails dragging along wood. I stopped, heart thudding loudly in my chest. My breath came quick and shallow, and I told myself to calm down. It was just an old building. Old buildings make noises. That's all. I moved down the hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps. Room numbers glowed dimly in the failing light. Each door was closed, unmarked, but as I passed them, I noticed something odd. The locks were undone. Every single one. No one had left in a hurry if they'd taken the time to lock their doors. But the night clerk said everyone had left suddenly, which meant they had to have left in a rush or been forced out. I tried one of the doors. It creaked open easily, revealing a room frozen in time. A bed neatly made, a half-empty bottle of water on the nightstand, a suitcase sitting by the window. Nothing seemed out of place. Except that nothing was here. I closed the door softly and kept walking. On the far wall, a fire extinguisher hung crooked, its red paint chipped and dull. Near it, a faded poster peeling from the wall warned against desert heat stroke and dehydration. I tried to read the fine print, but the paper flaked away under my fingers. A sudden thud echoed down the hall. I froze. The sound was solid, like a suitcase dropped hard on the floor. Then silence. I rounded the corner slowly, eyes scanning the length of the hall. Nothing moved. No sign of life. The motel was a ghost town, empty and waiting. But waiting for what? The door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar. Strange, since the others were all closed. I approached, the hum beneath my feet growing louder now, almost a vibration I could feel in my bones. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was bathed in pale moonlight filtering through the dusty window. A small desk sat against the far wall, scattered with papers and a half-empty cup of coffee that had long gone cold. A calendar hung crooked above it, the dates circled in red. I crouched down, picking up a crumpled note. The handwriting was hurried, jagged, almost frantic. Leave. Now. They're coming. I swallowed hard. The words burned in my mind, heavy with urgency and fear. Who was coming? And why had everyone left? A sudden movement caught my eye, a shadow flickering just outside the window. I spun around, heart hammering, but the desert was empty. Nothing but swirling dust and the distant glow of headlights on the highway. I stepped back into the hallway, the note clenched tightly in my hand. The hum had stopped. Silence. Complete silence. The night clerk's calm assurance echoed in my mind, "It's safer that way." I wasn't sure if that was a warning or a promise. I had to know more. I couldn't leave without answers. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this motel held secrets darker than the desert night outside. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't meant to leave at all. I stood in the hallway, the crumpled note still clenched in my fist, the words "leave." I glanced toward the night clerk's desk, where he sat behind the glass partition, his face unreadable in the flickering fluorescent light. His eyes met mine, calm and steady, like a man who had seen this all before and decided it was better not to panic. "It's safer that way," he'd said. But safer for whom? The words spun inside me, tangled with doubt and fear. I needed to move. To act. To test whether I had any control over this place. The hallway stretched out silent, the carpet muted beneath my feet. I remembered the calendar above the front desk, the date circled in red. I stepped closer, the paper's edges brittle, the ink smeared. Today's date. Not marked for any holiday or event I could recognize, just that ominous ring. Why is that date circled? I asked, voice low, trying to keep steady. The clerk's lips twitched, just a hint of a smile. "That's when it all started," he said softly. "Everything changed after that." His words felt like a riddle, and I realized I was staring into a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve. I forced myself to breathe. The note's warning echoed louder than reason. "They're coming. But who were they? And why had every other guest vanished without a trace? No calls, no messages left behind. Just empty rooms, silent beds, and the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke that hung in the air, cold and heavy with silence like a ghost. I moved away from the desk, the weight of the note heavy in my pocket, and headed toward the vacant rooms. One had its door slightly ajar, a sliver of dim light spilling out into the hallway. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside, the room was eerily untouched. The bed was made, the sheets crisp but cold. On the small nightstand, a half-empty glass of water sat, beads of condensation clinging to the sides. I sniffed the air, dry, dusty, with a faint metallic tang. Something about the room felt wrong, like it was frozen in a moment before chaos. I stepped toward the window, peering out into the desert night. The wind picked up suddenly, stirring loose sand against the glass. The headlights I'd seen earlier were gone now, swallowed by the darkness. A shuffling sound behind me made my heart leap. I spun around, spotting the night clerk standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, voice low. "I'm trying to understand," I replied, gripping the edge of the dresser. "Why is everyone gone? What's going on here?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's not safe outside. Not anymore." "Safe? What do you mean?" "Safe from what?" He hesitated, then stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. The lock clicked softly. A small detail, but it sent a spike of cold through me. "They're not just guests," he said finally. "Those who left, they were part of something. They knew too much." I blinked, confusion and dread mixing. "Part of what?" He looked away, voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a group moving through this area. Not law enforcement. Not tourists. People who watch, listen, and take what they want. If you're here, you're on their radar." I swallowed hard, feeling my throat go dry. "Why didn't you warn me?" His gaze met mine, steady but unreadable. "I did, in my own way. Saying it's safer here, it's true, but only if you don't try to leave." The words hit me like a punch. "I have to get out. I have to leave." "You don't understand," he said. "The road out isn't clear anymore. Not since last night." A cold shiver ran through me as I remembered the crackling static from the radio earlier. No signal, no calls. The highway. The empty taxi at the gas station. It suddenly felt less like a coincidence. I moved toward the door, trying the handle. Locked. The clerk's hand was already on it, his fingers pressing down firmly. "I can't keep you here," he said quietly. "But the desert outside isn't forgiving. If you try to leave, you'll find it's not just the heat or the miles that'll stop you." His words were a warning wrapped in something darker, resignation, maybe even menace. I glanced toward the window again. The desert stretched vast and empty, but I knew it wasn't empty. Not really. "Why me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then, "Because you asked questions. Because you're the kind who doesn't walk away when told to. And because, once you cross this place, there's no going back." A slow, sinking realization settled over me. The motel wasn't just a stopover. It was a trap. Or maybe a checkpoint. Somewhere you entered voluntarily but couldn't leave unless you understood the rules. I felt the weight of the note in my pocket again. They're coming. This wasn't vague anymore. It was imminent. Something or someone was headed this way. The clerk moved toward the small radio on the desk, fiddling with the dial. Static hissed, then a voice crackled through, low and distorted. Stay inside. Don't look outside. Wait for the signal." The voice cut out, leaving a buzzing silence. My hands trembled. I wanted to run, to scream, but the desert night pressed in too tight. The motel walls felt like they were closing in. "Is there anyone else here?" I asked, voice cracking. "Not anymore," he said. "Everyone left when the warning came. Except you. Why not just tell me outright?" I swallowed again, mouth dry. "Why all the secrecy?" He looked me in the eyes, serious now. "Because if you knew everything, you'd never have come. And once you're here, the choice isn't yours anymore." A sudden knock rattled the front door. Sharp, deliberate. The kind of knock that doesn't ask for permission. My heart jumped into my throat. The clerk's face tightened. "That's them." I looked toward the window. Shadows shifted outside, closer now, a gathering of shapes just beyond the glass. I backed away, panic rising like bile. But the door stayed shut. They want to make sure no one leaves. I pressed my palm to the cool window pane, watching the desert swallow the last of the fading headlights. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was part of whatever was unfolding. And the night was far from over. The door creaked. The lock clicked again. I realized with a cold certainty, I'd already crossed the point of no return. The knock came again. Louder this time, sharper, like a hammer striking wood with intention, not a question, but a command. My throat constricted. I could hear the thin scrape of sand against the glass, the soft murmur of voices just beyond the window, voices low and urgent, but impossible to make out clearly. The desert night outside felt suffocating, thickening, as if the air itself had weight. The clerk didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the door, calm, unreadable. I swallowed hard, the dryness clawing at my tongue. Who's there?" My voice was barely a whisper, cracked and uncertain. "Guests," he said. "Or what's left of them. They don't want you to leave." I blinked, confusion twisting into something darker. "Why? What do they want?" He shrugged, but the motion was tight, controlled. Control. Fear. It's all the same thing here. His gaze flickered toward the flickering fluorescent light overhead. The buzzing hum filled the room, a thin veil of annoyance and menace. "You asked why you can't leave. Because they don't want you to. And they'll do whatever it takes to make sure." The words sank in. Thicker than the desert heat, heavier than the night pressing in through the cracked window. I could taste metal on my tongue, the bitterness of panic rising. My hands trembled again, fingers curling into fists on the desk's chipped edge. Outside, the shadows shifted. I caught a glimpse of a figure, blurred and indistinct, but human enough. The knocking stopped, replaced by a slow, rhythmic tapping, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl because it's deliberate, patient, waiting. "Can you call someone?" "The police? The highway patrol?" I asked, voice tight, trying to sound steady. The clerk shook his head. "There's no one. Not here. Not out there." His smile was thin, brittle. "The desert swallows signals. Phones don't work. Radios, maybe, if you have the right frequencies. But no help is coming." I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the desk, listening. The motel's old air conditioning wheezed somewhere in the distance. A dog barked far away, sharp and solitary, then fell silent. The smell of dust and stale cigarette smoke clung to the room, mixing with the faint aroma of something sour and rotten beneath the floorboards. I tried to ignore it. The door rattled again, a little. Not hard, but enough to make the whole building shudder. I could hear breathing now, uneven and ragged, just beyond the thin wood. I swallowed against the dry lump in my throat, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst. "What do they want from me?" I whispered. The clerk's eyes flicked to mine, steady, unsettling. "You staying means they don't have to move on. They need someone who doesn't belong, someone who'll stay put, someone they can mess with." He tapped a knuckle against his temple, slow and deliberate. Control. Fear. Power. The air felt colder suddenly, or maybe I was just imagining it. I edged back from the desk, the worn vinyl chair scraping against the cracked tile floor. My mind raced. Escape. Run. But where? The desert stretched in every direction, empty and unforgiving. The motel was an island, a trap. The clerk stood, his movements smooth, deliberate. "Look," he said, voice low, "I'm not your enemy. I just live here. I've seen this before. People come and they leave, or they don't. I'm here to help you stay alive. That's all." I hated the way the words sounded, like a promise and a warning all wrapped into one. Help me? By locking me in? He shook his head quickly. "No locks. No chains. But the rail lock is out there." He gestured vaguely toward the window, where the shadows had gathered again, darker now, pressing closer. "You have to wait. For the signal. For the right moment." The words from the radio replayed in my ears. "Stay inside. Don't look outside. Wait for the signal." The voice was distorted, but the message was clear. I glanced at the door again. The silence beyond was thick, oppressive. Suddenly, the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows flickered violently, plunging the room into brief darkness before the buzzing fluorescent returned. The clerk's face was half in shadow, half in that sickly greenish light. "If you step outside before then," he said quietly, "they'll get you. And no one will come looking." My chest tightened. The thought of those figures lurking just beyond the thin walls made my skin crawl. But staying here, waiting, trapped with a man whose calm made me want to scream, felt worse. I moved toward the window, heart pounding so hard I thought it might echo through the desert. I pulled back the threadbare curtain just a little. The shapes were clearer now, 3 figures, maybe 4, their faces hidden beneath dark hats, bodies motionless except for the slow, deliberate tapping against the glass. I could almost hear the scrape of boots on gravel. One of them looked up suddenly, and I caught a flash of a pale face, ice cold and hard. The kind of look that doesn't blink, doesn't waver. It was the look of someone who'd been waiting a long time. Someone who knew exactly what they wanted. I jerked back from the window, heart hammering, breath shallow. The clerk watched me, expression unreadable. "You're not ready yet," he said softly. "Not for what's coming." "What's coming?" I demanded, voice rising despite myself. He didn't answer right away. The sun had sunk behind the jagged horizon by the time I pushed open the motel's creaking front door again. Night settled around me like a cold, invisible sheet, and the desert air was sharp, filled with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic, perhaps the rusted pipes or old wiring inside the building. I stood in the lobby, the dim fluorescent light overhead flickering in tired, uneven pulses. The silence swallowed the space whole, thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure what I expected when I came back downstairs. Maybe an empty parking lot under the indifferent stars. Or a note taped to the front desk explaining why the place had gone silent. Instead, I found the night clerk waiting. He sat behind the counter, his face illuminated by the weak glow of a dusty computer screen. His eyes were calm, too calm, as if he had been expecting me all along. "You're still here," he said softly. His voice didn't rise or fall, but it carried a strange weight. I thought you might leave. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. Not until I understand what's going on. Why did everyone check out? Why did you want me to stay? He shrugged, the movement barely noticeable. People leave for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's the heat, sometimes a sudden feeling they shouldn't stay. You're just different. You stayed. I wanted to press him, to demand answers, but there was a distance in his expression, a barrier I couldn't see past. Instead, I paced the lobby, the cracked tiles cold beneath my shoes, the faint hum of the air conditioner rattling somewhere in the ceiling. Outside, a dog barked far off, lonely and uncertain. I caught the dry taste of dust on my tongue and smelled the faint, greasy scent of old coffee brewing somewhere in the back. Why me? I asked finally, turning back to the desk. He looked up from the screen, his eyes dark and steady. Maybe because you're not like the others. You listen. You don't just pass through. You stay. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Was it a compliment or a warning? I couldn't tell. My hands trembled, and I clenched them into fists to stop the shaking. You don't have to stay, he added quietly, as if reading my mind. But if you leave, you'll understand. You might never come back. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I wanted to laugh, to say he was twisting his words like a riddle, but there was no humor in the line between us. The motel was a cage, and I was the only prisoner left, or maybe the last guard. I thought about the rooms upstairs, empty and silent, the beds made but untouched, the doors locked with no one behind them. The heat had driven everyone away, or maybe something else had. I couldn't shake the feeling that the motel itself was alive with secrets, breathing quietly beneath the cracked plaster walls. I sat down in the worn lobby chair, its vinyl cracked and sticky from years of neglect. The clerk watched me, waiting. Time stretched thin, the silence growing louder with each passing minute. The ceiling light flickered again, and I blinked against the sudden darkness before it hummed back to life. I'm tired, I admitted. And scared. I don't know what you want from me. He smiled then, a slow, careful smile that didn't reach his eyes. I don't want anything. You're free to go. But sometimes, freedom is a trap. That sentence hung in the air, heavy and strange. I wanted to argue, to demand he explain, but my throat was dry, words caught in the back of my mouth. I looked around, the lobby feeling suddenly smaller, walls inching closer like the desert night creeping in through cracked windows. Then, without warning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up, a message from an unknown number, leave before dawn. No signature, no explanation. I swallowed hard, the taste bitter. The clerk's eyes flicked toward my pocket, but he said nothing. I stood and faced him. Why warn me? If I'm not supposed to go, why tell me to leave? He shrugged again, that same lazy, unreadable movement. Because some things need to be set right. Whether you stay or go, you have a choice. I thought about the road ahead, the miles of empty black stretching like an open wound under the stars. Leaving meant uncertainty, but staying meant... what? Becoming part of this strange, silent motel? A fixture in its quiet decay? I looked back around the lobby, the faded carpet, the peeling wallpaper curling at the edges, the dusty vending machine humming softly. It was a place out of time, caught between desert heat and cold shadows, between memory and forgetting. I made my decision. I'm leaving, I said, voice firmer than I expected. But I'm not coming back. The clerk nodded, a slow acceptance settling over his features. Good. You'll do fine. I stepped outside. The night was vast and dark, the air cooler now, the stars sharp and clear overhead. The silence followed me, but it felt less like a weight and more like a promise. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching underfoot, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing the empty highway stretching ahead. I didn't look back. As I drove away, the motel faded into the desert, a ghostly shape swallowed by the night. The air inside my car smelled faintly of dust and old vinyl, but it was mine. Real and solid. For the first time in days, I breathed freely. The desert was still vast, still indifferent, but I was moving. And that made all the difference. Story 3, Uneasy Guardians, a dog's silent warning. The first time I noticed something was off, Max, the dog, stopped me dead in my tracks. I looked around, expecting maybe a stray cat or a raccoon, but there was nothing. Just the quiet street, the distant hum of a car passing by, and the smell of damp leaves. Max's fur bristled along his back, and he refused to move forward. "Come on, boy," I said, voice softer than I intended. Nothing there. He didn't budge. Not for another 30 seconds, at least, before finally turning back toward home, dragging on his leash like he wanted to be anywhere but there. I told myself it was the usual dog paranoia. Maybe a sound just beyond my hearing, or a scent caught in the breeze. I had dogs before. They get spooked, that's normal. But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the tightness in my chest. Our house was a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet suburb, the kind of place where neighbors nod but don't linger. I'd moved in about 6 months earlier, after a messy breakup and a job transfer. Max came with me, a rescue with a patchy coat and a tail that wagged too hard for his own good. He was my anchor. The house was older, with creaky floorboards and a basement that smelled of mildew and forgotten things. I liked the quirks. It felt lived in without being cluttered. The wooden staircase groaned underfoot, the kitchen tile cracked at the edges, and the faded wallpaper in the hallway had a faint floral pattern that was almost pretty under the right light. I was alone most nights. Work had me late, and friends were scattered across town. I liked the silence, the way the house settled around me once darkness fell. But Max's behavior started to chip away at that calm. He began growling inside the house, too. Not at the door, where a delivery person or neighbor might stand, but at empty corners. The far end of the living room, the doorway to the guest room, the shadow under the staircase. Once, he even refused to enter the laundry room, backing away with his hackles raised and a low whine in his throat. I checked for drafts, noises, even mice, but found nothing. No loose floorboards, no strange sounds behind the walls. The house smelled the same, musty but familiar, like old books and a hint of lemon cleaner. Yet Max wouldn't go where he once had no problem. I started sleeping with the bedroom door closed, partly because I wanted to keep Max close, partly because the house felt too big and empty at night. I'd lie awake sometimes, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old wood, the occasional tap of rain against the window pane. It was peaceful, mostly. Except on nights when I thought I heard breathing that didn't belong to me, shallow and deliberate, somewhere just beyond the walls. I told myself it was the house settling, or a trick of the wind. Maybe I was tired, or my imagination running wild. I wasn't a nervous person. I'm usually the one who reassures others when they jump at shadows. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find the guest room door ajar. I was sure I'd left it closed. The room was empty, the bed unmade from the last time a friend stayed over weeks ago. There was no sign of disturbance, no footprints, no moved furniture. I closed the door, once, twice. Max sat at the threshold, watching me with those dark eyes, unblinking. All right, I muttered, rubbing my temples. Nothing to see here. But the air was different somehow. Thicker. It smelled faintly of something metallic, maybe old dust mixed with the sharp tang of something else I couldn't place. The kind of smell that lingers just long enough to unsettle you. That night, I barely slept. I kept waking at odd hours, hearing faint shuffles or the creak of a floorboard. Max stayed alert too, lying at the foot of the bed with his ears pricked. The next morning, I found the kitchen window open a crack. I was certain I'd shut it the night before. No wind, no rain, no sign of forced entry. Just a thin slit of cold air slipping inside. I called the landlord, who promised to come by and check the locks. I didn't expect much. He was the type who shrugged off complaints, more interested in rent than repairs. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone, or something, was in the house when I wasn't looking. The days blurred. Max's growling grew more frequent, his behavior more erratic. He'd circle the house at night, barking softly at walls, ears flattened. I caught myself watching the shadows longer than usual, listening for noises I couldn't place. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the basement when I noticed an odd draft coming from behind a stack of old boxes. The plaster near the corner was cracked, and behind it, a faint hollow sound. I tapped the wall with my knuckles, the echo different from the rest of the room. Curiosity won over caution. I moved the boxes aside, revealing a small, narrow door almost hidden in the shadows. It blended in with the rest of the wall, painted the same dull beige. The kind of door you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. I tried the knob. Locked. Of course. I stood there for a moment, the musty air thick around me. Max sat at the foot of the stairs, eyes following my every move, silent and still. Secret rooms, I whispered. Great. I could laugh it off, make a joke about old houses and their hidden quirks, but the truth was my hands trembled just a little as I turned away. That night, I double-checked every lock, every window. I sat in the living room with Max curled on my lap, the quiet pressing in from all sides. When I finally went to bed, I made sure the guest room door was locked tight, the kitchen window shut, and the basement door secured. I was alone in the house. I told myself that again and again. But Max didn't seem convinced. The next morning, sunlight pushed through the curtains in sharp, uneven bands. I couldn't stop going over the little door in the wall. That hidden panel, painted the same dull beige as the rest of the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay. How had I missed it all these months? The house was full of creaks and sighs, sure, but this felt deliberate. Someone had to know about it. Someone had used it. Max got up suddenly, ears angled toward the hallway. He gave a low, rumbling growl. I froze, staring down the empty corridor. Nothing. Just the usual scuff marks on the walls, the faint smell of old plaster and faintly sour hardwood. I rubbed my face, the rough stubble scratching against my palm. It felt like I hadn't slept at all. Not really. I needed to be practical. I'd find a way to get that door open. If there was someone else in the house, well, that was a problem I had to face. After breakfast, I started with the basics. I'd called a locksmith before, but they wouldn't come until the afternoon. So I went through the rooms, taking photos, notes, anything that seemed out of place. A dent in the baseboard, faint footprints by the back door, a couple of plastic water bottles shoved behind the trash cans in the garage. None of it was concrete, but patterns were starting to form. Someone had been moving around here. Max refused to go into the study, sitting at the threshold with his hackles raised and a low growl vibrating deep in his throat. I tried to coax him in with a treat, but he backed away, eyes fixed on the far corner. I squinted. Nothing. No shadows, no dust motes dancing in the light. Just an empty room. I told myself it was just nerves. Dogs sometimes do that. but I couldn't shake the feeling that Max was seeing something I wasn't. Something or someone lurking just out of sight. I started checking the basement next, flashlight in hand. The damp smell pressed into my nostrils, the rough concrete walls cold and clammy to the touch. Boxes I'd forgotten about lined the shelves, but nothing unusual at first glance. Then, tucked behind a stack of old paint cans, I found a small, folded piece of paper. The edges were frayed, the ink faded but legible. It was a note. Nothing threatening, just a few words. Be careful who you trust. They watch. My throat tightened. I flipped the note over, half expecting more. Nothing. Just a crude handwriting. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and Max padded silently to my side, nose twitching. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. I called my sister, hoping for a break in the tension. "Hey, Jess," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you come by today? I need a second pair of eyes." She sounded upbeat, oblivious to the undercurrent in my voice. "Of course. What's going on?" I hesitated, then told her about the door, the note, Max's behavior. She promised she'd be there in a couple of hours. While waiting, I paced the living room, scanning the walls, the windows, the corners. The house felt smaller somehow, like walls were closing in when I wasn't looking. Later, Jess arrived, her bright smile momentarily cutting through the gloom. She brought coffee and an energy I hadn't realized I needed. We went straight to the study, where Max still wouldn't enter. "Maybe there's a vent or crawl space," she suggested, leaning close to the baseboards, running her fingers along the edges. You never know what old houses hide. We combed through the room systematically. Then Jess stopped, her hand hovering near the floor near the corner Max had been watching. "Wait," she said softly. "There's a loose panel here." I knelt down, prying gently. The panel shifted, revealing a narrow crawl space, just wide enough to squeeze through. It smelled musty, like stale air and forgotten things. Could someone fit in there? I asked, heart hammering. Jess nodded slowly. Yeah. And if they've been hiding, this might be their spot. We sat back, the weight of that realization pressing on us both. If someone was living inside my house, watching me every night, what did they want? Why hadn't I noticed sooner? The sun was setting by the time Jess left, and I felt the house settle into a new kind of silence. Max curled up on the couch, eyes never leaving the crawl space. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every shadow felt amplified. I kept hearing faint noises, soft footsteps just beyond the walls, the scrape of something shifting in the dark. Then, around midnight, a whisper. Almost inaudible, but there. Someone was there. I sat up, breath caught in my throat, straining to hear. Max crawled low and steady, gaze fixed on the hallway. I reached for my phone, hands trembling. The light from the screen cast long shadows, but the corridor was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I moved toward the crawl space, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my ribs. The panel was slightly open. Not by much, just a crack. But enough. Someone had been here. Still was. I backed away slowly, the hair on my arms prickling, and locked the panel tight. Silence. Complete silence. Until the faintest sound of breathing. Right behind me. The breath behind me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt frozen, the air thick and stale in my lungs. The faintest scrape of a foot against the hardwood floor, then silence. I wasn't alone. Not in the way I'd hoped. Someone was here, hiding inside the walls of my own home. I didn't know how long I stood there, the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay shrinking around me, shadows coiling like smoke. The crawlspace panel sat closed and locked, but the feeling of someone watching didn't ease. Max's growl rose, low and steady again, eyes locked on the hallway like he could see through the wall. The night dragged on, a slow torture of waiting and listening. Every creak, every distant sound outside the window made me jump. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. It was as if the house itself had turned into some kind of trap, tightening around me with invisible hands. Morning came with a thin gray light that did nothing to lighten the weight in my chest. Max barely moved, head resting on his paws but eyes alert. I didn't want to leave the couch, but I knew I had to. I had to find out who was in my house and why. The first thing I did was check the crawlspace again. The lock was still secure, no sign of forced entry. But the panel had a faint scratch near the edge, almost like a fingernail mark. Whoever had been there knew how to stay hidden, but they'd made mistakes. I had to find those mistakes. I started with the rooms Max refused to enter. The guest bedroom was the worst. The air felt colder there, stale, like it hadn't been used in years. I noticed a faint smell, sour, like sweat and damp fabric. Not the smell of a house left empty, but of someone living in hiding. I opened every cabinet, checked under the bed, looked behind the curtains. Nothing obvious. But then, behind a loose panel near the baseboard, I found it. A small bundle of belongings wrapped in a faded cloth, a worn paperback book, a half-empty bottle of water, and a crumpled note. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I just need a place to stay. Please don't call the police." The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. Someone was here, watching me, and afraid. Or maybe desperate. I sat down on the floor, trying to piece it all together. How long had they been living here? How had I not noticed? The food in the fridge was untouched, the bathroom clean, my clothes in the closet. Yet, someone had been here, moving between rooms, breathing the same air I did. Max barked softly, breaking my concentration. I looked up to see him staring down the hallway again, hackles raised. The smell of something else hit me then, faint, but impossible to ignore. Cigarette smoke. Not mine. Not anyone's I knew. The thought made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a trespasser. This was someone who had lived here, hidden, watching me every night. Someone who could come and go, unseen. I called my friend Laura, voice low and urgent. "I think someone's been living here. In the house." She didn't hesitate. "You're serious?" "Yes. I found a note. They're scared, but they're here. Call the police." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm not sure that's the right move. What if they're dangerous? What if they run when they hear sirens?" Laura sighed. "What do you want to do, then?" "I don't know." The words tasted bitter. "I have to find out more. Tonight, I'm setting up cameras." She agreed to come by later with some gear. I didn't want to be alone, not now. The day crawled by with a weight in my chest. I kept checking the crawlspace, the guest room, the hallways. Max refused to leave my side, his eyes darting toward every shadow. I wondered if he could smell the person, could sense the danger I couldn't see. That evening, Laura arrived with a small kit, motion sensors, night vision cameras, a flashlight that cut through the darkness like an item. We set them up in the hallway, near the crawlspace and the guest room. "We'll catch them tonight," she said, voice steady but quiet. I nodded, biting my lip. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The distant hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the settling wood, Max's soft panting at my feet. We sat in the living room, lights off, the glow of the laptop screen the only illumination. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, just past midnight, movement. The camera in the hallway flickered, and through the grainy black and white image, I saw it. A shadow. A figure. Just beyond the doorway, moving slowly, carefully. My breath caught. Laura and I exchanged a glance, no words, just the silent agreement that this was real. The figure paused, then turned its head, just a glimpse of a face. Pale, gaunt, eyes wide and terrified. Not hostile, but desperate. I wanted to run, to get out, but I couldn't. The house had changed. It wasn't my sanctuary anymore. The person stepped back, disappearing into the darkness of the crawl space. I closed the laptop, the room suddenly too quiet. We have to go down there, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Laura hesitated. Are you sure? No. But I have to know. We grabbed the flashlight, hearts pounding. The narrow crawlspace entrance loomed before us, cold air seeping out like a breath from some hidden place. As I lowered myself into the cramped space, the smell hit me again, damp earth, sweat, fear. The walls pressed close, rough plaster scraping my skin. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle. A whisper from somewhere deep below. Please, don't be angry. The voice was fragile, breaking. I froze. There was no turning back now. This was the point of no return. The crawlspace welcomed me like a tomb, cold and suffocating. Please, don't be angry, it whispered again, barely audible. The voice was a thread in the darkness, fragile enough to snap. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. We're not angry. We just want to understand. Silence answered me, thick and heavy. Then came a shuffle, soft but deliberate. The dim beam caught a shadow moving just ahead. The figure stepped forward, and I could finally see the face again, pale, gaunt, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Not hostile, but desperate, like someone who'd been holding their breath too long. Why? The word escaped me before I could stop it. The person looked away, voice cracking. Because no one else would listen. That was the first crack in the wall between us, the first fragile attempt at connection. I wanted to ask so many things, but didn't know where to begin. The owls had swallowed this person whole, had given them a place to hide, but robbed them of everything else. Their clothes were filthy, threadbare, as if they'd been living here for months, maybe years. The scent of unwashed skin mixed with the cold earth filled the cramped space. Laura shifted beside me, her breath hitching. Who are you? How did you get in here? The person's eyes flicked her, then back to me. I was here before you. Before the owls belonged to anyone. I blinked. Before me? That's impossible. They shook their heads slowly, a ghost of a smile twisting their lips. Not impossible. Just ignored. The flashlight beam caught the outline of a small makeshift bed, a few tattered books stacked haphazardly nearby, a collection of half-empty cans and bottles. This wasn't a temporary shelter, but a life lived in secret, one I hadn't even suspected. How long? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Too long, came the reply, the words heavy with something I couldn't name. Regret. Resignation? Or maybe the weight of being unseen for so long. I wanted to reach out, to pull this person into the light of day, but the walls pressed in, cold, unforgiving. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was a prison, a trap. Why hide? Laura's voice was steadier now, but I saw the tension in her hands tightening around the flashlight. The figure looked down, hands trembling. I had nowhere else. No family. No friends. No one came looking. The truth landed like a stone in my chest. The loneliness, the fear, it was all too real. This wasn't some intruder or criminal. It was someone broken by the world, clutching at the last shred of safety they could find. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. We should help you. The figure's eyes widened, disbelief mixing with fear. Help? You don't understand. Help means exposure. Exposure means losing what little I have left. They were right. The house had become a refuge, but also a cage. How could I break through that without shattering everything? Suddenly, a faint creak echoed from behind us. My stomach twisted. Did you hear that? Laura nodded sharply, shining the light back the way we came. The crawlspace entrance was a blur of shadows. Something moved. Someone else? The figure tensed, voice urgent. They come at night. Always watching. Waiting. Who? I demanded. No one you would want to meet. A cold sweat broke out along my spine. I remembered the nights when footsteps echoed outside my bedroom window, the distant sounds my dog had barked at but I had dismissed as neighbors or stray cats. The figure's eyes locked on mine. They know you're here now. They'll come for you. My breath caught. The house felt alive with menace, the air, cold and heavy with silence thickening. The knowledge that I wasn't alone anymore, nor were we safe, pressed down hard. We need to leave, Laura whispered. Now! But I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run, to leave this nightmare behind. Another part, stubborn and reckless, wanted to stay, to face whatever this was. To find out how deep the darkness went. The figure shifted, pulling something from the shadows, a small, tattered notebook. I kept a record. Maybe it will explain. I took it, fingers brushing the rough cover. The pages were yellowed, filled with cramped handwriting and strange symbols, maps of the house, notes about noises and movements, names I didn't recognize. This is, I trailed off, overwhelmed. Proof, the figure said quietly, of what I've been living with. Of what's coming. Suddenly, a louder noise shattered the silence, a thud followed by a scraping sound. Something heavy being dragged across the floor above us. Panic surged through me. The crawlspace suddenly felt like a tomb, closing in faster. We don't have time, I said, voice sharp. You have to come with us. The figure hesitated, then nodded. I can't stay here anymore. We moved quickly, squeezing through the narrow tunnel, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on us. My dog's bark echoed faintly from the kitchen, a reminder that the house itself was no longer a sanctuary. As we crawled out, the light from the hallway spilled over the figure's face again, gaunt, exhausted, but somehow relieved. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope. But as the door slammed shut behind us, I knew the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp, but the darkness inside still clung to me, whispering threats I couldn't yet understand. And somewhere in the shadows, someone or something was waiting. Watching. I didn't know what would come next. But I also knew there was no turning back. Not now. Outside, the night air bit sharply at my skin, crisp and unyielding as if to remind me the world kept turning, indifferent to the chaos unfolding inside my home. I glanced back at the house, windows dark, silent, a shell holding untold secrets. It felt smaller now, less a refuge and more a trap I'd somehow unwittingly invited into my life. We should call someone, I said, voice low, uncertain. The police, or Something. The figure shook their head. Not yet. If they come with sirens and questions, I won't last. I'm not ready. I swallowed hard, the cold air filling my lungs like a bitter medicine. Then what do you want me to do? They looked at me then, eyes hollow but steady. Help me disappear. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Why here? Why me? But my throat tightened, words snagging like broken glass. I realized I didn't even know their name. Had never known it. For all the nights they watched me, lived within my walls, they'd been a ghost without a face. The dog moved closer, brushing against my leg with a soft whine. The sound grounded me. I crouched, running my hand over the coarse fur. Okay. Let's figure this out. We found a bench a few houses down, one under a flickering street lamp that cast a weak halo. The figure sat, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly between knees. I stayed standing, restless, my eyes darting back toward the house as if it might erupt in flames or screams. You should have told me sooner, I said, voice cracking. I had no idea it was this bad. They shrugged, a small, bitter smile. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Who would? A person living inside someone else's house, watching them every night? Sounds like a nightmare or a trap. It was, I said simply. For a long moment, silence stretched, only the distant bark of a dog, faint and lonely, and the rustle of late autumn leaves swirling against the pavement. I'm sorry, they said finally. For everything. For the fear you felt. For the loss of your peace. I inhaled sharply, the words stirring something deep and raw. You didn't just take my space. You took my sense of safety. I don't know how to trust anything in that house anymore. They nodded, understanding. And that's fair. The dog's steady breathing, the faint hum of streetlights, the crisp night air, it was almost peaceful now, but I knew the calm was fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over dark water. I need to know, I said, voice steadier. How long were you here? How did you even survive? They looked away, ice tracing the cracked sidewalk. Almost a year. I found a hidden space above the ceiling, near the attic. I brought food when you left for work, stayed quiet, never made a sound. It wasn't about you, really. It was just. I had nowhere else. I pictured the cramped crawl space, the stale air, the cold plaster walls pressing in. I couldn't imagine a more isolating prison, yet they'd made it home. Made it a place to watch life go by. You're lucky your dog noticed, I said, voice low. If not for him, I might still not know. They gave a small nod. He's a good dog. I smiled, a real one this time, the corners of my mouth trembling. Yeah, he is. We sat there a while longer, the night stretching thin between us, each lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd saved just in case, someone who could help, quietly, without fanfare. Help is coming, I told the figure. You won't have to hide anymore. They looked up, eyes brighter, hope flickering like a fragile flame. The next day was a blur of calls and visits, social workers, counselors, people who asked questions and took notes, their voices polite but urgent. The house felt impossibly empty without the figure inside, an echo chamber haunted not by ghosts but by the raw truth of human desperation. I stayed close to my dog, watching him move through the rooms with cautious familiarity, as if reclaiming ground inch by inch. The corners he'd once avoided now held no menace, only the faint scent of lingering fear. At night, sleep came in fits, shadowed by memories of muffled footsteps overhead and the knowledge that someone had been there all along. I caught myself checking locks obsessively, peering into dark closets, listening for the faintest sound. It was a habit, a residue of unease that wouldn't simply wash away. But I learned to live with it. Weeks later, I visited the shelter where the figure was staying, no longer a stranger, but a person trying to rebuild. They smiled when they saw me, a real smile this time, one that didn't carry the weight of years in hiding. "How are you?" I asked, the question simpler than it felt. "Better," they said. "Safer." "It's strange, feeling safe." I nodded, understanding more than I could say. That's what we all need, isn't it? It was. Safety. Trust. The simple right to exist without fear. Walking home, my dog at my side, I looked up at the sky, the pale wash of dawn bleeding into the horizon. The owl stood silent, its secrets laid bare but no longer holding power over me. The experience changed me, made me more aware of the fragile boundaries we live within, the invisible walls between strangers and ourselves, between safety and danger. I became more cautious, yes, but also more compassionate, more willing to see the unseen struggles beneath quiet faces. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint creak of floorboards or catch a shadow moving just beyond the corner of my eye. My dog's ears perk up, alert but calm. It's a reminder that even when the immediate threat is gone, the echoes remain, and we carry them with us. Forever changed. Story 4, Highway 57's shifted reality. Night trapped at truck stop. I never thought much about the truck stop on Highway 57. I arrived just before dusk, the sun a dull orange smear behind the hills. My car's engine ticked softly as I pulled into the last open spot near the restroom building. The air smelled faintly of diesel and pine needles, the kind of scent that sticks to your clothes if you're outside long enough. I remember thinking how quiet it was, almost too quiet, for a place that's supposed to be a pit stop for long-haul drivers and wanderers like me. I had the windows down a crack, the cool night air brushing against my face, carrying a distant hum of insects and the rustle of dry leaves. It was the kind of quiet that sets your thoughts loose, the kind that makes you notice things you usually don't. Like the flicker of a neon sign that buzzed unevenly, the way the cracked asphalt felt rough underfoot, or the faint, persistent smell of something metallic, oil maybe, or rust. I stretched my legs, walking up to the diner. Its windows were dim, only a few tables occupied, and the waitresses wore tired smiles as they wiped down counters. I ordered a coffee black enough to drown out the night and sat by the window, watching the darkness settle. The jukebox played a slow country song, the kind where the singer's voice drags like it's carrying some heavy, invisible weight. After a while, I went back to the car. I remember the sound of the engine dying down, the click of the door locking. My head hit the pillow with a weight that pulled me under almost immediately. I woke to a silence that didn't feel right. The first thing I noticed was the absence of the streetlight's flicker. I blinked against the dark, expecting to see that familiar, uneven glow. Instead, the lot was bathed in a pale light that didn't belong to any lamp. The air was colder than before, biting at my skin through the thin fabric of my shirt. I smelled something different too, a sharp, chemical tang, like bleach mixed with something sour. I sat up, heart thudding in a way that wasn't quite panic, but close. The truck stop looked wrong. The restroom building was there, but the faded sign above the door had changed. I could swear it said East Side Depot yesterday, but now it read West End Station. The windows of the diner were dark, but the silhouette inside wasn't familiar. The tables were rearranged, and the few people inside didn't acknowledge me when I looked their way. Not a glance, not a nod. It was as if I was invisible. I got out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. My hands trembled slightly, but I told myself it was just the cold or maybe the coffee wearing off. I walked toward the diner, the door creaking open before I even reached it. Inside, a man stood behind the counter, a thin guy with close-cropped hair and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. His voice was flat, practiced, like he'd said the same thing to dozens before me. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. No greeting, no question. Just that. I blinked. I was here last night. I parked right outside. I had coffee. He shook his head, almost impatiently. No. Nobody's been here since yesterday afternoon. You must be mistaken. I looked around. The other customers, a woman with a red scarf and a man in a faded baseball cap, all avoided eye contact. They didn't speak when I tried to ask about the truck stop or the restroom building. Instead, they exchanged quick glances, like sharing a secret I wasn't meant to hear. I stepped back outside. The lot stretched out before me, but the trucks I'd seen earlier were gone. The big rig with the faded blue stripes, the white van with the dented side, vanished. In their place were different vehicles I didn't recognize, and none of them seemed to notice me. My fingers curled into fists. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe I'd fallen asleep and dreamed the whole evening. Maybe the clock had skipped, and I'd wandered into some kind of time glitch. I know how that sounds, but it was the only explanation that fit. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not a single bar. The screen was dim, almost dead. I tapped the power button again. Nothing. That's when the unease settled deep in my chest. I walked toward the edge of the parking lot, scanning for the highway. The trees that had lined the road were missing, replaced by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it, there was nothing but empty fields and a low, heavy fog rolling in like it owned the night. I turned back toward the diner. The man behind the counter watched me through the window, his expression unreadable. I tried to call out, but my voice caught somewhere in my throat. Then, out of nowhere, a woman approached from the far side of the lot. She was older, wore a plain coat and carried a paper bag that rustled with every step. She stopped a few feet from me, eyes sharp and unblinking. "You don't belong here," she said softly, almost kindly. "I was just here." "Last night," I said, voice shaky. Her eyes narrowed. "No, you weren't." The words hung between us, heavy and impossible. I swallowed hard. The cold crept back in, deeper this time. I wanted to ask why, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat again. Instead, I stared at the place I thought I knew, the truck stop that should have been a simple rest on a long drive. The night felt suddenly vast, empty in a way that swallowed sound and light. And somewhere beneath it all, a quiet, insistent fear began to grow. Had I lost my mind? Or was someone else rewriting the rules while I slept? I didn't have time to figure it out. Not yet. I just knew one thing. I was no longer welcome here. The woman's words echoed in my head, slicing through the cold night air as if they were carved in stone. "You don't belong here." I took a cautious step back, the cracked asphalt rough under my boots. The faint hum of distant traffic was gone now, replaced by a silence so thick I could almost taste it. The air smelled faintly of burnt rubber and cold metal, but underneath there was something else, damp earth, maybe, or a hint of decay. I couldn't place it. "I don't know what you mean," I said, voice tight, but my hands trembled just the same. "I was here last night. I parked there." I pointed toward the spot where my truck should have been. Or at least where I thought it should have been. The woman's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "No, you weren't. This isn't the place you think it is." That was it. I needed to move, to find proof. I couldn't stand still with the cold creeping into my bones and the creeping dread tightening my throat. Turning away, I headed toward the main building, the neon sign flickering erratically above the entrance. The rusted letters spelled out something that almost looked familiar, but the arrangement was wrong. The T in truck stop had shifted sideways, and one of the bulbs buzzed with a low, uneven hum. It was subtle, but unsettling. I blinked against the artificial glare. Inside, the air was thick with stale coffee and bleach. The linoleum floor was scuffed and cracked, the walls lined with peeling posters for local events that made no sense to me. A faded calendar on the wall showed a date from 2 months ago. My mind stumbled over the details. There was no way I'd missed that many days. A clerk stood behind the counter, a man probably in his 60s, with a face withered like old leather and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. He wiped a glass with a rag, his movements slow and deliberate. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, almost bored. "I was here last night," I said again, trying to keep my voice steady. "I parked my truck right outside." He looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "No one's been here overnight." "You must be mistaken." I swallowed hard. I glanced toward the window. Outside, the truck stop lot looked different. The rows of pumps were fewer, the signs rearranged. Even the old diner across the street had a new name. I had driven past that place so many times. How could it be? Changed? "Look," I started again, but the man cut me off. "Sir, you're not from around here, are you?" "No," I said, the word tasting bitter. He leaned forward a little. "Maybe you should get some rest. This place isn't for strangers, especially ones who lose their way." His tone wasn't threatening, but the implication was clear. I was unwelcome. An outsider. A ghost haunting a place that denied my existence. I left the diner, the door's chimes sounding hollow behind me. The cold air hit my face again, sharper now. I ran my hand over the rough plaster of the building's corner, feeling the uneven texture beneath my fingertips. The night had stretched out, fast and indifferent. I needed answers. Or at least something concrete to hold on to. Walking back toward where I was sure I'd parked, I noticed a faded flyer pinned to a nearby bulletin board. The edges curled and the ink was blurred, but I could make out a date, 2 weeks ago. A local festival, or maybe a market day. I tried to remember if I'd seen any signs of it last night. Nothing came to mind. A sudden noise, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, jerked me from my thoughts. The sound was sharp, urgent, then cut off abruptly. Silence. Complete silence. I took out my phone, hoping for some signal. Nothing. No bars. The screen flickered briefly before going dark. I charged it fully before I stopped here. That should have been enough. But now it was dead, as if drained by the place itself. Panic fluttered in my chest. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and scanned the lot again. Shadowed shapes moved just beyond the edge of the streetlights, figures in coats, moving with purpose but never close enough to see clearly. I blinked, trying to focus, but they faded like smoke. I was alone. And yet, I wasn't. That's when I saw the truck. Or rather, a truck. Not mine. It was parked where I thought mine should have been, but the license plate was unfamiliar. The cab was clean, polished, and the driver's door was open, empty. I stepped closer, heart thudding hard enough to fill my ears. The scent of diesel and leather mixed with something else, cinnamon. Odd. I looked inside. The seat was empty. No sign of anyone. "Hello?" I called out, voice cracking. No answer. A sudden movement caught my eye. A scrap of paper fluttered under the windshield wiper. I grabbed it, hands trembling. The paper was a receipt from a gas station, dated the previous day. My handwriting, unmistakably. But the location wasn't here. It was miles away, in a town I passed through 2 days ago. Confused, I folded the paper and stuffed it into my jacket pocket. If someone was playing games, they were thorough. Too thorough. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and started walking toward the edge of the lot. Maybe beyond, past the dim streetlights and empty roads, I'd find something familiar. Or someone who'd remember me. Then I heard voices. Not far off. Low, murmuring, urgent. I froze. 2 figures emerged from the shadows near the diner's back entrance. They wore dark clothes, faces half hidden under hoods. They stopped when they saw me, eyes flicking quickly between each other. Lost? One of them asked, voice rough. I swallowed again. Yes. I think so. The other stepped forward, hands in pockets, ice cold. You shouldn't be here. No one's supposed to be. Why? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The first shrugged, then nodded toward the road that led out of the truck stop. Time to leave. I wanted to ask what they meant. To demand answers. But something in their tone, fatalistic, resigned, made me hesitate. Behind them, the neon sign flickered again. The letters shifted in the glow, strange and wrong. The night was closing in, thick with secrets I wasn't ready to face. And I was running out of places to hide. The cold air bit sharper now, a stiff wind threading through the cracked asphalt and rusted metal signs. The 2 figures hadn't moved, just watched me with those unreadable faces half lit by a flickering neon sign that buzzed overhead. The diner's back door rattled in the wind, paint peeling like old scabs. I swallowed, the dryness in my throat making it hard to speak. Why shouldn't I be here? My voice cracked. The one with the rough voice shrugged again, like the answer was obvious. Because this place isn't what you think it is. You never really arrived. I blinked. That sentence spun in my head, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere. What do you mean? I parked here last night. I slept in my truck. The second figure stepped forward, eyes sharper now, cutting through the dim. No one saw you. No cameras caught you. The lot was empty all night. You're not supposed to be here. Not supposed to be here. The words echoed in my skull. I glanced back toward my truck, parked under a weak street lamp casting long, thin shadows. The cab looked real enough, scratched paint, a dent near the door handle. My jacket, my bag inside. Everything was how I'd left it. But if no one knew I was here, if no one remembered me, then what was this place? An uneasy chill snaked down my spine. I have to leave, I said, voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. I'm going to the highway. To the next town. The first figure laughed softly, a sound more like a hiss. You think you can just walk out? The road you came in on? It's not there anymore. I turned sharply, heart hammering. The stretch of cracked pavement leading out of the lot was gone, replaced by a wall of dense trees, black and solid like a trap. I blinked again, hoping it was a trick of the light, but no. It was real. I could smell the damp earth, the sharp tang of pine needles crushed underfoot. I don't understand, I whispered. The ground felt wrong beneath my boots, uneven and unfamiliar. The second figure stepped closer, voice low. This place shifts. Things move. The trucks, the signs, the roads, they rearrange. People forget. You're stuck inside it now. Stuck. The words sank deep. I felt a sudden wave of nausea, cold sweat slicking down my back. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs felt leaden. Why me? I managed. Why am I here? They exchanged a glance, then the first one said, because you asked questions. Because you noticed. I clenched my fists. What is this? A game? No game, the second said, voice sharp as broken glass. A system. And you're a glitch. The word hit me like a punch. Glitch. What did that even mean? Some mistake? An error in their design? Look, I said, trying to steady my breath. I don't know who you are or what this place is, but I'm not leaving without answers. The first figure shrugged again, but there was a flicker of something, respect, in their eyes. Fine. But once you step past that light, they nodded toward the diner's neon sign, there's no going back. I swallowed hard. That light. The only source of color in this gray world. It buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly glow over cracked concrete and peeling paint. Why can't I go back? I asked. Because going back would erase you. We don't let glitches leave, the second said. I took a step toward the diner, drawn by the promise of answers, but the first figure's voice stopped me. Wait. You don't get it. There's no outside anymore. No highway, no town. The world you know is gone. The words slammed into me. I blinked hard, trying to hold on to reality. But the smell of burnt grease from the diner's kitchen, the hum of the neon sign, the cold bite of the night air, they were all so real. Then what am I supposed to do? I asked, voice cracking. Survive, the second said flatly. Play the game. Follow the rules. I shook my head, heart racing. What game? What rules? The first figure pulled something from inside their jacket, a crumpled slip of paper, yellowed and creased. They handed it over without a word. I unfolded it carefully. The paper had a list of names, dates, times, and strange symbols I couldn't decipher. At the bottom, a message scribbled in hurried, messy handwriting. Find the pattern. Find the exit. Don't trust the mirrors. Mirrors? I looked up, scanning the surrounding walls of the diner. There was a window reflecting the empty lot, but no obvious mirrors. Why mirrors? I asked aloud. The second figure's eyes glinted. Because reflections lie here. They show what you want to see, not what's real. A sudden noise shattered the moment, a distant bark, sharp and urgent. I spun around, heart pounding. The lot was empty, but the sound echoed, bouncing off the walls like a warning. We don't have much time, the first figure said, stepping back into the shadows. Choose your next move carefully. This place will test you. Break you. I stood there, paper trembling in my hand, the cold wind tugging at my jacket. My truck sat behind me, but the road I came on was swallowed by thick trees. The diner's neon buzzed an unsettling rhythm. I was trapped. No highway home. No familiar faces. Just a maze of shifting streets and strangers who insisted I never arrived. And now, I had a choice, follow their cryptic instructions and dive deeper into whatever this was, or stay frozen in place, waiting for something worse. I folded the paper carefully, stuffing it back inside my jacket. The night pressed in closer, colder, heavier. I started walking toward the diner's front door, each step echoing like a countdown. The neon sign buzzed unevenly, casting a sickly green glow over the cracked pavement where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. No turning back. Not anymore. The diner's neon flickered erratically, casting fractured shadows that crawled across the cracked pavement. My boots scraped against loose gravel as I approached the entrance, the tension tightening inside me like a noose. The cold air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale grease, the kind of lingering scent that sticks to your clothes long after you leave. Somewhere in the distance, the bark came again, short, sharp, urgent. It wasn't a dog I heard before. Closer now, but still out of sight. I stopped just outside the door, fingers brushing the chipped metal handle. The glass was smeared, streaked with grime or perhaps smudges from hands desperate to get in or out. The light buzz overhead rattled my ears. I glanced back toward the lot. Empty. Silent, except for that distant bark that echoed like a warning. The paper in my jacket pocket felt like a weight, a promise and a threat wrapped in thin, crumpled lines. "We don't have much time," the voice had said. "Choose your next move carefully. This place will test you. Break you." I wasn't sure who he was anymore, or if it even mattered. I shoved my hands deep into my pockets and pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a tired jingle that sounded too cheerful for the mood. Inside, the diner was dim, its once bright fluorescent lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. The smell was stronger in here, coffee, grease, and something else. Something metallic, like old pennies left to rust. No one behind the counter. No customers. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint clatter of dishes somewhere in the back. I hesitated, listening. The bark again, now closer, almost inside the building. A sharp scrape on the kitchen door sent a jolt through me. "Hello?" My voice barely broke the silence. No answer. I stepped further in, boots echoing against the linoleum floor, the pattern cracked and faded from years of neglect. The booths were empty, the table sticky with spilled syrup and unwashed glasses. The air was thick with something stale, like a room closed up for too long, holding its breath. I pulled out the paper again, unfolding it carefully under the flickering light. Find the map. Trust no one. Simple. Cryptic. Terrifying in its vagueness. My mind raced. The map. The last thing I'd seen that resembled a clue was the folded paper they handed me outside, but this was something else. Something bigger. A puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. I turned toward the kitchen door, the scrape repeated, louder this time. My breath caught. The door itself looked warped, swollen with moisture. I pressed my ear to the rough wood. Voices, murmurs, low and hurried, but indistinct, like they were speaking through a wall of static. I pulled back, heart hammering. The diner was no longer just a place to hide or find answers. It was a trap. I could feel it in my bones. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the diner. I ducked behind a booth, body pressed against the cold vinyl, and peered around the corner. Two figures emerged from the kitchen. The first was the man who had spoken to me outside. The second, a woman I hadn't seen before, her face sharp in the dim light, eyes calculating and cold. They spoke quietly, but I caught a few words. "He's close. Too close. We can't let him leave." Not yet. The weight of it settled like a stone in my stomach. Not yet. I wasn't just lost. I was being hunted. My hands trembled. I cursed myself for coming in here, for believing any part of what they said. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what this place was, why the landmarks had shifted, and why everyone acted as if I was invisible. My throat dry, I slid back toward the door, trying to stay quiet. The bark had stopped. Silence. Complete silence. Outside, the night pressed in, thick and suffocating. The streetlights buzzed weakly, their halos blurred by the damp air. I had to move. I couldn't stay in that diner with them just feet away. But where? The truck was gone. The road was gone. The trees weren't where they should be. It was as if the whole world had been rearranged overnight, a sinister game with no rules I understood. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not surprising, but the cold pit of disappointment still sank deep. I tried the screen brightness, hoping for some light. It flickered weakly, then died. I was alone. No one coming. No way out. Suddenly, the diner's front window shattered, glass exploding in a spray that glittered like deadly confetti in the neon light. My heart leapt into my throat. I spun, searching the street, but saw no one. The wind carried a faint whisper, a hint of breath against my ear. Stay. The voice was low, almost a growl. Not the man's, not the woman's. Somewhere closer, someone watching. I backed away, the pain of glass shards crunching underfoot sharp and immediate. My jacket snagged on a jagged edge. Panic surged. I pulled free and ran out the door, into the cold night. The trees loomed, their branches clawing at the sky. I stumbled through underbrush, the rough bark biting into my palms. The bark came again, closer, faster. It wasn't a dog. It was footsteps. I dared a glance behind me. Dark figures moved between the trees, slipping through the shadows like smoke. Not chasing, but herding. Controlling. I reached a small clearing, breath ragged, heart pounding like a drum. The map. The paper. I fumbled for it, unfolding it again in the pale moonlight. The lines and markings shifted before my eyes, the landmarks rearranged like a cruel joke. I blinked hard. No! Not a trick of the light. Someone had altered it. I wasn't just losing my mind. The first thing I noticed was the air, sharp and cold in a way it hadn't been the night before. I blinked against the pale light filtering through the cracked windshield, the sky a brittle gray that promised rain. My hands, still trembling, gripped the steering wheel as if it might anchor me to some version of reality. I needed to figure this out. Now! For the past 2 days, I'd been trapped in this nightmare of shifting landscapes and uncanny strangers who insisted I'd never been here. But this morning, something was different. The truck stop, the one I'd parked at overnight, was no longer a stranger stage. It was familiar again, but in that fragile, half-remembered way you feel after waking from a dream you can't quite place. I pushed the door open. The hinges creaked, a sound so ordinary it jolted me. Outside, the gravel lot stretched out, the same faded yellow lines marking spaces where trucks had been parked. I looked around, searching for the signs I knew had disappeared yesterday, the gas pumps, the rusted diner sign, but they were exactly where I'd left them. The coffee shop was open, the scent of brewing grounds and frying bacon drifting toward me like a lifeline. I hesitated on the cracked concrete, my boots cold and wet from the morning dew. The air smelled of rain and engine oil, a mix I hadn't realized I missed until now. A distant dog barked, sharp and urgent, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. I wanted to believe this was real, that I was finally free of the madness. Inside the diner, the bell jingled as I stepped in. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a tired glow on cracked vinyl booths and a worn counter. Behind it stood a woman with sharp eyes and a tired smile. She glanced up and nodded, without any sign of recognition. No questions. No, you weren't here yesterday. Just normalcy. Coffee? She asked. I nodded, swallowing hard. Black, please. And, do you know if this place has been open continuously for the last few days? She shrugged, pouring the coffee. Sure. Been here for 20 years. This place doesn't close. I sipped the coffee slowly, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I watched her, this woman who seemed as real as the chipped mug in my hand. It was the first genuine human connection I had since the nightmare began. My voice was hoarse when I spoke again. I'm sorry if this sounds strange, but did I park here 2 nights ago? Last night? She paused, wiped her hands on her apron. You? No one's been here like that. That old phrase again. The one that made my chest tighten. But this time, I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, thanks. I stepped outside, pulling my jacket tighter against the chill. The truck stop's layout no longer mocked me. The landmarks were correct. The roads were where I remembered them. I thought about the strangers who denied my existence, the terrifying versions of this place that seemed designed to erase me. The paranoia, the isolation, it had all felt so real, so vivid. But maybe it was never real at all. Maybe it was my mind cracking under the weight of loneliness and exhaustion. But then, why did I still feel that prickling on the back of my neck like I was being watched? I walked toward my truck, every crunch of gravel underfoot echoing louder than it should. The sky had darkened again, heavy clouds rolling in fast. I glanced back toward the diner. The woman was still inside, wiping tables, unaware of the storm I carried with me. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dashboard. The memories came flooding back, faces that weren't there this morning, voices that denied me, the shifting signs and impossible directions. I realized I'd been fighting something far more human than madness. Someone had manipulated the environment, the people, even time itself around me. I wasn't losing my mind. I was trapped in a carefully constructed lie. But why? And who? The question gnawed at me, but the answer wasn't waiting at this truck stop. I had to move. I had to leave. I started the engine, the truck rumbling beneath me like a heartbeat. As I pulled onto the main road, the rain began, cold and steady, the wipers swiping in rhythm with my thoughts. The world outside blurred, but inside, something had shifted. I wasn't the same person who'd arrived here days ago. Maybe not even the same person who'd woken in that strange version of the truck stop, where reality dissolved like mist. I had been broken, yes. But I was also waking up. The road stretched ahead, empty and gray, but certain. I would find the truth. Not here. Not now. But soon. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe without the weight pressing down on my chest. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't erased. I was still here. And I would prove it. The rain softened into a steady drizzle, the smell of wet earth filling the cab. I rolled down the window a crack, letting the cool air rush in, sharp and real. The taste of it was faint on my tongue, damp leaves, broken pavement, and something like hope. I didn't know what lay ahead. I only knew I had to keep moving. Because sometimes, the greatest horror is not the darkness around you, but the shadows inside your own mind and the courage it takes to step back into the light. The truck's tires hissed on the wet asphalt. I watched the rearview mirror, watching the truck stop fade into the mist behind me. It was just a place. A place I'd survived. And now, I was free. Story 5, Basement Breach, Dog Senses Hidden Terror. The first time I noticed something was off, I was heading down to the basement to grab the winter decorations. I blinked, startled. Max. What's wrong, bud? I crouched down, reaching out to scratch behind his ears, but he backed away, hackles rising. I stood up slowly, trying to shake off the sudden chill that had crept up my spine. The basement was just a basement. Old, cramped, a place where the heating system and water heater lived, along with the usual clutter of boxes and forgotten things. Nothing that should cause a dog to behave like that. Still, the growling continued. Max wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze darted toward the far wall, the one with the peeling paint and the small window sealed shut with duct tape. Empty corners. Nothing but shadows and silence. I swallowed hard, forcing a laugh I didn't quite mean. You're being silly. But Max wasn't convinced. He turned back toward the stairs, moving away from the door as if it were something alive and dangerous. I hesitated. The air was thick down here, damp and just a little musty, like a forgotten closet in an old hotel. The faint smell of rusted metal and mildew. I glanced at the light bulb hanging by a frayed wire, the one that flickered every time the furnace kicked on. Flicker. 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 The basement light had always been unreliable, but today it seemed worse, stuttering like a heartbeat struggling to stay steady. I reached for the switch, but Max's sudden bark, sharp and insistent, made me jump. He was staring again, ears pinned back now, tail low, more scared than angry. I rubbed my neck. This was stupid. Max was probably picking up on some noise I hadn't heard, maybe a mouse scurrying behind the pipes or the wind rattling something loose. I stepped toward the door, palms sweaty, the cold plaster wall pressing against my back. Come on, Max. It's just the basement, I said softly. He didn't move. I glanced around. The basement smelled slightly different than usual, but I couldn't quite place it. There was a faint metallic tang, almost like the scent of exhaust fumes, but that made no sense. The owls had no gas appliances down here, just the old oil burner that Dad swore was safe. Plus, the windows were closed tight. I shook my head. It was probably nothing. Maybe I was just tired, or Max was unusually jumpy after the fireworks last night. He'd been restless all day, pacing near the front door, sniffing the air like he was waiting for someone. The front porch light buzzed faintly outside, and a car passed by on the street, tires whispering over wet pavement. The smell of rain lingered in the air, fresh and sharp. I could hear the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, a hollow sound that reminded me how quiet our neighborhood had been lately. Too quiet. Max whimpered and circled, then finally settled beside me, but kept his eyes fixed on the basement door. I crouched down again and gave him a gentle squeeze. All right, we'll leave it for now. I didn't want to push it. I didn't want to make a fuss over nothing. Still, the unease clung to me like damp clothes after a storm. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. The kettle's whistle was sharp and sudden in the quiet house. Max lay at my feet, restless but calmer. I watched steam curl up from the mug, warm and soothing. The familiar comfort of the kitchen was supposed to help, but the strange feeling wouldn't leave me. I tried to ignore the faint headache creeping behind my eyes, the dull ache that had started mid-afternoon and now throbbed in time with the flickering basement light. Maybe I was just tired. Or maybe it was the house. Old houses always had their quirks. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Jenna. Dinner tomorrow? Need a break from all this work. I typed back quickly, grateful for the distraction. Down the hall, the old radiator clanked once, then hissed softly. The sound echoed like a sigh through the empty rooms. I glanced toward the basement door again, half expecting Max to bark or growl, but he was quiet now, curled up in a tight ball. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something invisible, lurking just out of sight. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me. The room suddenly felt colder. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination. But Max didn't agree. That night, I dreamed of the basement. Of dark corners where shadows moved, shifting just beyond the edge of the light. I woke with a start to the faintest scent of something bitter, like burnt plastic, seeping through the cracked window. Silence. Complete silence. In the morning, I found Max again staring at the basement door, refusing to go near it. His eyes were wide, unblinking. His body tense. I knelt beside him, brushing his fur softly. "We'll figure this out, buddy. I promise." But even as I said it, the cold knot in my stomach told me that the basement held secrets. Dangerous ones. And I was about to find out what they were. The morning light was weak, slanting through half-closed blinds and dust motes that floated in the stale air. I stared at that door, the chipped paint peeling in jagged strips, the faint odor of burnt plastic lingering like a bad memory. It was impossible to ignore how the air felt heavier near it. I could almost taste it, a metallic tang, dry and sharp at the back of my throat. I shifted uneasily. Maybe Max knew, after all. I pulled out my phone and started Googling symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, partly because the scent reminded me of warnings I'd heard somewhere. Nausea, dizziness, confusion. The list was long and terrifyingly vague. I tried to shake off the creeping sense of paranoia. It had to be something more ordinary. I told myself that several times. Max whined softly and nudged my hand with his nose. I looked down at him. His eyes were pleading, and I hated feeling so helpless. I needed proof. Hard evidence. The hardware store was only a few blocks away, and I grabbed my jacket, telling Max to stay put. He didn't move, just watched me with those wide, dark eyes that made me feel like I was abandoning him. In the car, the engine hummed, but I noticed the faint smell again. It wasn't outside, it was inside the car, or maybe it was just me imagining things. At the store, I found the carbon monoxide detector without much trouble. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a slack smile, told me they sold out fast this time of year. "People get worried," he said. "Old pipes, faulty heaters. It sneaks up on you." I nodded, buying 2 of them, one for the basement and one for the main floor. I didn't want to wait. I wanted to know everything, right now. Back home, Max held his ground at the basement door when I approached with the detector. I could feel his muscles tense, the low rumble in his throat barely audible but terrifyingly real. I swallowed hard and took a deep breath, pushing the door open. The basement swallowed me in its cold, damp embrace. The light bulb flickered weakly overhead, casting uneven shadows across the concrete walls, rough and stained with patches of mold. The air was thick and stale, making my chest tighten. I set the detector on a shelf near the furnace and waited. Max stayed at the threshold, ears pricked, eyes fixed on a corner where the shadows seemed to pool unnaturally. I wasn't sure if it was the poor lighting or something else, but I didn't want to look away. After a few minutes, the detector beeped once, then twice. A sharp, insistent sound that echoed off the walls and made my skin prickle. I grabbed the device, staring at the screen. The numbers flickered upward low at first, then climbing steadily. I felt my mouth go dry. I ran back upstairs, Max close behind, his tail tucked low. The air felt thinner now, colder, and the bitter smell was stronger, creeping into my nostrils with every breath. I called the gas company immediately. The technician was firm but calm, asking questions I struggled to answer clearly. "Stay out of the basement," he said. "We'll send someone to check your system right away." The wait was unbearable. Max refused to eat, pacing the living room with a restless energy that made me uneasy. I kept checking the detector, watching the numbers hover at levels that made my skin crawl. I tried to distract myself with chores, but even mundane tasks felt urgent, like I was racing against an invisible clock. The walls seemed to close in, the silence pressing down like a heavy blanket, Outside, a neighbor's dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and sudden, breaking the quiet. When the technician arrived, he wore a serious expression as he unpacked his tools. The house felt different with him there, as if the threat had taken shape in the daylight. He moved quickly, inspecting pipes and vents, his brow furrowed. "It's worse than I thought," he said quietly. "Your furnace's ventilation is blocked. Carbon monoxide is leaking right into your basement and the rest of the house." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The thought of the invisible gas creeping through the walls, invading the air we breathed, was suffocating. He explained the risks, the symptoms, and the urgency of fixing the problem. "You've been lucky so far. Symptoms can be subtle, especially at low levels. But it builds up, and then it's deadly." Max crawled softly, looking toward the basement once more. I was grateful for his vigilance, even if I couldn't explain it. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat by the window, watching shadows stretch across the streetlights, the cold knot in my stomach tightening. The house was quiet, but the basement door seemed to pulse with something unseen. I kept the detector close, its faint beep a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beneath us. And I knew that whatever else waited in those dark corners, it wasn't the only threat. The walls whispered secrets I dared not hear. The night stretched on like a slow, suffocating breath. I kept turning the conversation over in my head, the way the inspector had looked at me with that urgent, almost haunted expression. "You've been lucky so far." The words echoed, but luck wasn't a strategy. Not for something you couldn't see, smell, or hear. Not for a silent killer hiding in the air we breathed. The house was still, but the silence throbbed in my ears. I could hear the hum of the street lamp outside, distant cars idling somewhere far away, and Max's quiet breathing. The basement door sat motionless, yet I felt its presence like a weight pressing against the floorboards. I wanted to believe that closing it would keep the danger locked away. But the truth was creeping through the cracks, through the very air. Sleep was impossible. I tried to read, but the words blurred. I tried to watch TV, but the noise felt hollow, disconnected. Every time I glanced at the detector, the rhythm of its beep seemed frantic, impatient. And Max crawled low again, sharper this time, fixated on a corner where nothing should have been. I leaned forward, trying to catch whatever it was he sensed. The basement didn't smell like it used to. There was a faint metallic tang, almost bitter, like stale pennies mixed with dust. It made my throat dry and scratchy. I swallowed hard. The next morning came too quickly, the pale light slipping through the curtains like a thin promise. I woke with a headache that pulsed behind my eyes, a dull ache I couldn't shake. It wasn't just a lack of sleep. There was something else, something wrong in my chest, a tightness that made breathing feel like a chore. I sat up, rubbing my temples, listening to the owls waking around me. The basement door was still closed. Max stayed close, pacing the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay with quiet tension. I looked down at the detector. It hadn't changed, still blinking, still beeping in that maddening, steady rhythm. I called the inspector's number. His voicemail picked up, tight and businesslike. I hesitated, then left a message, voice shaky despite my effort to sound calm. "Can you come back today? We need to figure out what's next." I hung up and tried to eat breakfast, but the coffee tasted bitter, like ash. Max refused his food, his eyes darting to the basement door again. I paced the kitchen, trying to think, trying to plan. The gas company had told me to avoid the basement until the leak was fixed. But what if it wasn't just the basement? What if the whole house was compromised? The thought set my skin crawling. I checked the utility room, where the furnace sat. The inspector had mentioned a cracked seal on the vent pipe, tiny, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I ran my hand along the cold metal, feeling the rough edges and the faint vibration from the blower inside. Somewhere beyond that wall, the gas was escaping. It was everywhere. I needed more help. I called my neighbor, Emma, who worked in environmental safety. She agreed to come over, sounding concerned but calm. When she arrived, Max barely acknowledged her, still fixated on the basement threshold like it was a line that shouldn't be crossed. Emma inspected the furnace, nodded at the vent pipe, and frowned. "This is bad," she said softly. "You can't just wait for the repair guy. This could be turning the whole house into a trap." Her eyes met mine. "You need to get out. For now." I stared at her, heart thudding. "Out? Where would I go? I can't just leave the house." She shook her head. "It's not about what you want. It's about what you need. Carbon monoxide is invisible and deadly. It doesn't wait." I looked at Max, who crawled again, low and warning. The basement door loomed behind him, silent but threatening. I paced. I thought of packing a bag, but my hands trembled. The idea of leaving felt like admitting defeat, that I couldn't protect my home or myself. But staying felt worse. Every breath was a gamble. I tried calling the repair service again. No answer. I left another message, urgency lacing my words. I kept checking the detector, watching it blink like a heartbeat, steady and merciless. Then a knock at the door startled me. Emma opened it, letting in a cold draft that made the curtains flutter. "I called a friend," she said, stepping inside. "He's a technician. He can come by in an hour." Relief and dread tangled in my chest. The technician was a lifeline, but the clock was ticking. Every second, the invisible poison crept closer. I sat down heavily, Max settling beside me but still tense. I stared at the basement door, feeling trapped by my own walls. The house had become a cage, the air a tool I couldn't see. Emma handed me a glass of water. "You're going to be okay," she said, but I wasn't sure. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp, urgent. I glanced at Max. His ears pricked forward, eyes wide. Then he did something I hadn't seen before. He backed away from the basement door, retreating into the living room as if the very floor beneath us was unsafe. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a gas leak anymore. There was something else in the house. Something we hadn't accounted for. The walls didn't just whisper secrets, they shouted warnings. And I was running out of time. The basement door loomed in front of me like a wall of silence. Emma sat on the couch, her legs crossed tightly, hands folded in her lap, her gaze flicking between me and the basement door. "You sure you want to check it again? Maybe we wait for the technician." I shook my head, swallowing hard. "No. I need to know what's really going on. Waiting feels like giving up." My voice was rough, almost foreign to my own ears. The weight behind the door pulled at me, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Max crawled low, a warning rumble that vibrated through his chest. I glanced down at him. "Okay, buddy. Let's do this." The basement steps were cold beneath my fingertips as I gripped the railing. The air shifted, thickening with a faint metallic tang I hadn't noticed before, something sharp, like pennies in a damp cellar. I took a breath, reminding myself to stay steady. The light bulb above flickered, casting uneven shadows that danced along the cracked plaster walls. Max hesitated at the top step, his fur bristling. I crouched beside him, whispering, "It's just us." But his eyes were fixed on the far corner of the room, where the furnace sat, old and rusted. The smell was stronger there, a sour, chemical bitterness that seemed to cling to my throat. I moved closer, heart hammering in my ears. The furnace's metal casing was warm to the touch, but not from heat, more like a slow, creeping heat that radiated unease. I knelt down and examined the pipes leading from the unit. One of them had a faint, amber stain near the joint, a telltale sign of a leak. Could carbon monoxide really be leaking here? I'd read about it, the silent killer, but never thought it could be hiding in my own house. The thought twisted in my chest, cold and merciless. Max whined, stepping back, his tail low. "Yeah, I know," I said, voice cracking. "It's dangerous." Suddenly, a faint hiss hissed from the corner, soft, almost imperceptible. I froze. Max's hackles rose. The basement light flickered violently, then dimmed, shrouding everything in a sickly half-darkness. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen glowed weakly, but no signal. How had that happened? I was standing right beneath the house, but the world above felt miles away. "Emma," I called out, voice hoarse. "Can you hear me?" No answer. Panic fluttered in my chest. I scrambled to the stairs, dragging Max behind me. The steps creaked beneath my weight, louder in the silence. When I reached the top, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. My breath caught in my throat. "Emma?" I called again, pounding on the door. The house was eerily still, no footsteps, no response. Then the lights went out. Darkness settled like a shroud, thick and suffocating. I fumbled for the flashlight in my pocket, the beam stabbing through the blackness, trembling with my shaking hand. Max barked sharply, darting toward the living room. The air was heavier here, too heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I took a cautious step forward, then another. Something wasn't right. The smell was stronger upstairs, acrid, metallic, and unmistakably wrong. I stumbled toward the kitchen, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst through my ribs. The carbon monoxide detector on the wall was silent. No beeps. No warnings. I cursed under my breath. The damn thing must be broken. That's when I noticed the window was open. Not cracked, but wide open, curtains fluttering in the night wind. A cold draft swept in, slicing through the oppressive air. I hadn't left it open. Had Emma? Had someone? A sudden noise made me whip around, a soft thud, then the faint scrape of shoes on wood. My skin prickled. I wasn't alone. "Emma?" I called, voice strained. No answer. Max crawled low, stepping protectively in front of me. The house groaned, old pipes rattling somewhere deep inside the walls. A shadow moved near the hallway, just out of the flashlight's reach. I swallowed hard. Who's there? Silence. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. My hands clenched into fists. I didn't want to believe someone else was here. But the signs were all there, the open window, the footsteps, the strange noises. This wasn't just a gas leak anymore. The house had become a trap, and I was the prey. "Emma," I whispered, voice barely audible. "If you're here, say something." No answer. The flashlight flickered, casting the shadow into a shape that was all too human. Movement to my left. A figure leaned against the wall, face obscured by the dim light. I stepped back, heart hammering so hard I thought it might stop. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, a low chuckle echoed through the room, cold and hollow. I didn't recognize the voice, but it sent a chill crawling up my spine. Someone was here. Someone who knew. The basement door creaked again, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Max barked, his hackles rising, teeth bared. "I'm calling the police," I said, voice trembling but firm. "Get out of my house." The laughter stopped. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then the figure stepped forward, into the beam of my flashlight. It was a man. Mid-30s, with a thin, weary face and eyes that didn't quite reach the light. "You shouldn't have come down there," he said softly. "They don't want you to know." "Who?" I asked, voice cracking. "What's going on?" He smiled, but it wasn't warm. "This house isn't just leaking gas. It's hiding something much worse. And you've already been breathing it in." My throat tightened. I looked at Max, whose growls had softened into whines. The air tasted metallic now, thick and bitter, leaving a burning trail down my windpipe. "Why?" I whispered. "Because some things are better left buried," he said, voice low. "But you won't stop. Will you?" I shook my head, despite the dread sinking into my bones. "No." The air still smelled faintly of that oily, metallic tang like the inside of an overheated car engine when I finally stepped back into the kitchen. The door to the basement was shut behind me, even though I hadn't closed it. My dog, Rufus, sat by the stairs, his eyes fixed on the dark corner beneath the steps, teeth bared in a low, unfamiliar growl. I knelt beside him, running a hand through his coarse fur, feeling the old thrill of relief mixed with something colder, more urgent. I had called the emergency repair company the moment I realized something was wrong, when the technician's handheld detector beeped wildly near the furnace and the air vents. But they wouldn't arrive for hours. The waiting room of the house suddenly felt vast and empty, each second stretching longer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to figure out what to do next. I sat at the kitchen table, the surface sticky with crumbs from the morning's hastily abandoned breakfast, and tried to think. My hands trembled a little as I picked up the phone to call my neighbor, Mr. Lewis, the retired fireman who had once told me stories about old houses and the hazards they hide. The line clicked, then rang. "Hey, it's me," I said, my voice almost too quiet in the empty kitchen. "Listen, something's wrong with my furnace. The carbon monoxide detector's going off, and I think the basement's filling up with it. You around?" There was a pause. Then, in his usual gruff but steady tone, he said, "I'm home. Keep your windows open if you can, and don't go down there." That was the last thing I wanted to hear, but I knew better than to argue. Rufus whimpered softly at my feet. His ears twitched toward the basement door like he was listening for a sound I couldn't hear. I wanted to believe it was all bad wiring or a false alarm. I wanted to tell myself that the smell was just the furnace acting up, that I was just tired and overthinking it. But something in Rufus's eyes told me otherwise. I walked through the living room, windows wide open, the spring breeze stirring the curtains like restless ghosts. The house no longer felt like home. It was a trap, a silent, invisible menace turning the air into poison. I tried to remember how long we'd been living here, how many mornings I'd brewed coffee and watched Rufus chase sunbeams without a care in the world. The contrast was sharp, brutal. The repairman arrived just after noon, a lanky man with grease-smudged hands and a tired smile that didn't quite meet his eyes. He carried a toolbox that looked heavy with secrets. He didn't say much, just got to work, his face close to the furnace, sniffing the air as though it were a puzzle he'd cracked 100 times before. "The leak's bad," he muttered finally, voice low enough so only I could hear. "If you'd stayed down there any longer, well, you're lucky. Carbon monoxide's a sneaky one. You can't smell it, can't see it. It just creeps in and takes over." I nodded, swallowing hard, trying to imagine what luck really meant in this context. Rufus pressed his head against my leg, his body still tense. I thought about the empty corners where he had crawled, the way the house had seemed to close in around us, the sudden headaches I'd ignored, the dizziness I'd chalked up to stress. The technician worked quickly, shutting off the furnace and venting the basement with fans. I watched the air move, trying to feel the difference between the poison atmosphere and the fresh breeze flooding in. It was subtle but unmistakable, like the difference between a sigh and a gasp. Later, after the house had been cleared and the repair completed, I sat on the porch with Rufus at my feet. His tail thumped gently against the wood, a steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the yard, painting the world in gold and faded blue. I thought about the days ahead, how I'd have to check every corner of this old house, every pipe and wire, every creak and whisper that might hide another danger. How I'd have to live with the knowledge that something so invisible could nearly take everything from me. But also how I'd never ignore Rufus's warnings again, no matter how strange they seemed. Mr. Lewis stopped by in the evening, bringing a small box of fresh batteries for the new carbon monoxide detector I'd ordered. He sat beside me quietly, watching Rufus chase a moth in the fading light. "You did good," he said after a while. "Most folks don't listen until it's too late." I wanted to say something true and meaningful, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I just nodded and watched the sky darken, stars blinking awake one by one. The house felt quieter now, safer. But not the same. It had changed, and so had I. The shadows in the basement corners weren't empty anymore, they were warnings. A reminder that even the most familiar places could hide threats you couldn't see until it was almost too late. And I was done letting silence kill me. Story 6, Trail of No Return, Forest that Misleads Hikers. I never thought a hiking trail could argue with me. I came to this patch of woods because I wanted to escape the usual noise of the city, to find a quiet spot where a person could think without being interrupted by car horns or the endless chatter of strangers. The trailhead was tucked behind a sleepy little town, the kind where the main street still smelled faintly of bakery yeast and fresh pine from the nursery down the road. The map I'd grabbed at the visitor center showed a loop, maybe 3 miles, nothing too ambitious. But when I passed the old wooden sign, its paint peeling, letters faded, I realized I'd already stepped off the main track onto something less maintained. The forest here wasn't the manicured parkland I was used to. The trees leaned in close, their branches tangled like the fingers of an impatient crowd. The ground was soft with moss and needles, cushioned but uneven. I noticed how the air, cold and heavy with silence, smelled different, damp, like cold earth after rain, but the sky was clear. A faint, sour tang lingered, almost metallic. I couldn't place it. I paused to catch my breath and noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, small, quick, maybe a squirrel or a jay. Except it didn't sound right. No rustling, no sharp chirps. Just a brief, darting shadow that felt wrong for this time of day. I blinked, and it was gone. "Hello?" I said, a little louder than I meant to. My voice sounded strange, swallowed by the thick silence. No answer. I laughed nervously. Just me. No one else here. There was no one else. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I wasn't some expert woodsman, but I knew enough to recognize that trail markers were supposed to help hikers stay on course and out of trouble. The markers here were barely there, scratches on bark, a faded ribbon tied loosely to a branch. I squatted to examine one, brushing away dead leaves. The ribbon was old, frayed at the edges, and smelled faintly of mildew. I wondered who had put it there and why. I'd heard about this forest's reputation before, how hikers sometimes disappeared, vanishing without a trace, their last known coordinates near this very trail. I didn't believe in ghosts or dark woods stories. But the idea gnawed at me now, more as a curiosity than fear. I had to admit, my steps felt heavier, less sure. Pressing on, I noticed the trail seemed to narrow, almost imperceptibly. Where I expected to find clearings or sunlit breaks, there were only dense patches of underbrush and tangled roots. The ground was uneven, the soil spongy underfoot. At one point, I caught the scent of something else, something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with wet leaves. It made my stomach churn. I stopped again, pulling out my phone to check the time. Signal was patchy, the screen flickering as if struggling to connect. No messages, no calls. Just the hum of the device and the distant drone of a lawnmower somewhere miles away. A soft snap echoed behind me. I whipped around, heart tightening like a fist. Nothing but the trees standing still, their leaves whispering in a light breeze. I told myself it was a branch breaking, a deer maybe. I wasn't alone, but I was also not exactly where I wanted to be. The path ahead looked less like a trail and more like a faint suggestion. I stepped carefully, trying to keep track of landmarks. A crooked tree with a knot the size of a fist. A patch of bright orange mushrooms clinging to a fallen log. But each time I glanced back, the trail seemed subtly altered. A rock that hadn't been there before. A cluster of ferns shifted slightly to block the way I thought I had come from. Was I imagining it? I slowed down, trying to steady my breathing, to make sense of the strange tug I felt in my chest. The forest was alive in a way that felt intimate and hostile all at once. The sunlight, filtering through the canopy, painted mild patterns on the ground, but those patterns seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly. It was like the woods were watching, waiting. I remembered a line from a book I'd read years ago: "The forest doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive." I didn't know what that meant exactly, but right then, it felt close to the truth. Then I saw the footprints. Small, booted impressions pressed into the soft earth, heading off the faint trail. They were too fresh to be old, but too few to be from a large group. Whoever had made them was careful, moving silently, avoiding broken twigs and dry leaves. I crouched to study them, my fingers hovering just above the ground. The prints weren't mine. My breath caught. Should I follow them? I debated, my mind running through every what-if scenario. What if I was walking into trouble? What if someone else was already lost here? The stories of missing hikers weren't just rumors anymore. The forest didn't answer. It just held its breath with me. Maybe I should turn back, I muttered, but the words felt hollow. The path behind me didn't look the same as before, the familiar markers seemed to have vanished. Was I really lost? Or was the trail playing tricks on me? A distant bark shattered the quiet. Sharp. Urgent. Not a dog I recognized. I froze. Then, silence. Complete silence. I wanted to call out, to say something, anything, but my voice stuck in my throat. Instead, I took a step forward, drawn by the faint sound of movement ahead. The forest was no longer just a backdrop to a morning hike. It was a maze, a puzzle I hadn't asked to solve. And maybe, just maybe, it was leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. The bark had stopped, and with it, any hope that something, anything, was out there, waiting to explain the prints. I swallowed hard and wiped the sweat from my brow, though the temperature hadn't risen much. The air smelled of wet pine needles and something else, something faint, metallic, like rust or old blood. My stomach twisted. I shook my head, willing the thought away. I wasn't going to let my imagination run wild. Not yet. The path beneath my feet felt different. Subtly softer, as if the ground itself had shifted, guiding me deeper into the woods. I glanced back, but the trail was gone, no familiar places, no telltale scuffs on tree bark. Just endless green and shadows folding into each other. I wanted to curse the forest for swallowing its own way, but my voice was dry, brittle. I dug out my phone. No signal. Of course. The one thing I hadn't thought to bring was a map, but I convinced myself I didn't need one. Rookie mistake. My fingers trembled as I stuffed the device back into my pack. "All right," I muttered. "One step at a time." I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, then settled pointing east. That was good, right? East meant back toward the main trailhead. Or so I hoped. A snap to my right made me jump. Nothing but a squirrel darting between roots. I laughed, a short, sharp sound, then cursed myself for the relief it brought. I pressed on. The forest thickened. Moss clung to rocks, and the canopy closed tight overhead, squeezing out the sun. The air was cooler now, damp and heavy with the scent of decay. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in the way the trees leaned just a bit too close, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. A faint crunching noise came from behind. My breath caught. I stopped. Waited. Nothing. Then it came again, closer this time. Footsteps? No, too irregular. A twig snapped sharply, then silence. I turned, heart hammering. No one. Just shadows shifting between trunks. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every hair on my neck stood up. I decided to mark my path, tying bits of bright orange ribbon around branches. The color was garish against the forest's muted palette, but it was the best I had. If I needed to find my way back, those ribbons were lifelines. As I moved forward, I spotted something on the ground, a small, battered backpack, half hidden beneath a thicket of ferns. My breath hitched. The fabric was ripped, the zipper mostly undone. Inside, an empty water bottle and a crumpled map, no names or markings, just a crude drawing of the area. I pulled it out, hands shaky. The map showed the main trails, but also a faint dotted line leading to a spot labeled only as the clearing. A place I hadn't heard about before. The map looked old, withered edges and faded ink, but the route matched the direction I'd been pulled toward. I stuffed the map into my pocket and scanned the trees. The sunlight was fading faster than I'd expected. Shadows stretched like fingers, reaching for me. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to be here when night fell. I thought about turning back, but the trail behind me was still invisible. I kept moving, slower now, senses sharpened. Then I heard voices. Whispered, low, just beyond the ridge. I froze, straining to catch words. Not quite human, or maybe too human. Desperate, hushed. I crouched behind a fallen log, heart thudding so loud I was sure it would give me away. "Did you see him?" a voice whispered, rough and urgent. "Gone off the trail again," another answered. "This one's not coming back." My hands clenched into fists. Missing hikers. That phrase wasn't just an old cautionary tale anymore. It was real. And I was smack in the middle of whatever was happening. The voices moved closer, then further away, fading into the undergrowth. I stayed put, barely daring to breathe. When the forest fell silent again, the chill crept under my skin. I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal. I thought about calling for help. What could I say? That I'd stumbled into some kind of trap? That someone was out here, maybe watching me? The words stuck in my throat. I stuffed the phone away and stood. The forest no longer felt like a place of quiet adventure. It was a maze of watching eyes and whispered threats. I needed to get out. But which way? The map. The clearing. Whatever was there, it was the key. I didn't know if it was a trap or a refuge, but I had to find out. The first drops of rain splattered on leaves, cold and sharp. The sky was a muted gray, the sun long gone. The forest seemed to hold its breath again, waiting. I stepped forward, deeper into the unknown, and the trail shifted beneath my feet once more. Branches scraped against my jacket as shadows lengthened. Heart pounding, I scanned for the faint, worn markings on trees, breadcrumbs from someone who'd walked this path before me. The clearing had to be close. The rain came harder, soaking my jacket and turning the trail into a slick ribbon of mud curling between the trees. I swallowed down the rising urge to turn back, though every instinct screamed at me to run. The forest had changed. Not just wetter or darker, but colder in a way that no temperature gauge could measure, a chill that settled in your bones and made your breath fog in the thinning twilight. I stopped to catch my breath and stared down at the ground. The trail was no longer a clear path. Roots twisted like fingers, breaking through the dirt, rearranging themselves. I wasn't imagining it. The earth had shifted. Step by step, the route was pulling me deeper, guiding me towards somewhere I didn't want to go. The same way a marionette strings pull a puppet, except I was a puppet, and the strings were made of soil and shadow. I looked up, scanning the trees for the familiar blazes I'd seen earlier. Faded red paint, scratched into bark like a silent message. But now the marks were gone, or maybe I'd missed them, replaced by newer scars in the wood that didn't match. They were fresh cuts, clean and deliberate, like someone had been here recently. "Hello?" I called out, voice cracking. The forest swallowed the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones, no response. Just a distant rustle, like something moving just beyond sight. My skin prickled. I told myself it was just an animal. Deer or a fox. Nothing to worry about. But the way the branches swayed, too deliberate, too measured for wind, set my teeth on edge. I reached into my backpack for the flashlight. The beam was weak, flickering with every step, but better than nothing. I swept it across the trees and caught sight of something that made me freeze. A small clearing up ahead. Not the one marked on the map, no. This was different. Overgrown, littered with broken branches, and my stomach clenched, an abandoned backpack. The same bright orange color I'd seen on the missing hiker's gear in the news reports. I stumbled forward, heart thudding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The backpack lay open, its contents spilled across the damp earth. A water bottle, half full. A crumpled map, smeared with mud. And a notebook. I picked it up with trembling hands, flipping through pages filled with hurried handwriting. Names. Dates. Coordinates. Someone had been tracking their own disappearance in real time. I read a line aloud, voice barely a whisper. They said, "The trail moves. Don't fight it. It knows." I dropped the notebook. The words echoed in my mind. The trail moves. It knows. I laughed, bitter and hollow. Of course, the trail didn't know anything. It was just dirt and trees. But the idea that someone was out here, manipulating the path, using it like a trap, felt chillingly real. The missing hikers hadn't vanished by accident. They'd been led somewhere, willingly or not. The thought chilled me to the bone. The rain stopped suddenly. Silence. Complete silence. I realized then that turning back wasn't an option. The trail behind me had shifted, too, closing off the way I'd come. The path was no longer a two-way street but a one-way ticket into the unknown. I felt the weight of the backpack on my arm, heavier than it should be. Inside, the notebook's pages rustled, a whispered warning. I swallowed hard. The forest was no longer a place for wandering. It was a maze, A cage. And I was trapped inside. I forced myself to move forward, deeper into the clearing. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, metallic, faint but unmistakable. Blood? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away, but it lingered. Suddenly, I heard voices. Distant, muffled. I froze, straining to catch the words. They weren't shouting, not exactly. More like murmuring. Don't trust the way back, one voice said. They're watching, said another. My hands trembled. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my throat closed. I swallowed again and took a step toward the sound. Then a figure appeared between the trees, stepping into the dim light. A man, mid-30s, eyes darting nervously. He held a small radio, whispering into it with a panic I could feel from 10 feet away. Who are you? I asked, voice barely steady. He jumped, startled, then relaxed slightly. You're not supposed to be here. Neither are you, I said. What's going on? Where is everyone? He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me, eyes wide. They don't leave the clearing. Not once the trail starts moving. It's how they keep us. It's how they catch us. Who? I pressed. He shook his head. People. Someone's been trapping hikers, rerouting the paths, making sure no one escapes. If you try to turn back, the forest confuses you. The trail shifts. You get lost. Or worse. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Can I leave? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not anymore. Once you notice, you're in. The trail knows you're here. It won't let you go. I wanted to ask how he knew all this, but something in his expression stopped me. There was exhaustion there, and fear. Maybe even guilt. Wait, I said, glancing back at the direction I'd come from. The trail, it's not natural. Someone's changing it? He nodded slowly. They use the terrain, the weather, even the forest itself. Fallen trees, shifted soil, broken branches. It's all deliberate. We've been trying to figure out who, but well, no one leaves to tell the story. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the trees, like a gunshot but sharper, closer. I jumped, heart pounding again. The man cursed under his breath. We need to move, he said, urgency in his voice. They could be nearby. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. Instead, I followed him, the weight of the backpack dragging me down, the forest closing in tighter with every step. The trail beneath us shifted again, and I realized this wasn't just a path. It was a trap set by people who knew how to use the forest as a tool. And now, I was caught in the middle. There was no turning back. Not anymore. The crack had barely faded when the man pulled me deeper into the thicket, his hand firm on my shoulder, dragging me from the faint trail we'd been following. The forest seemed to close in all around us, the branches scraping at my jacket like fingernails on plaster. My breath caught, not just from exertion but from the sudden, raw awareness that whatever was out here wasn't distant. It was watching. Waiting. We moved fast, but the ground beneath our feet betrayed us. I could swear the path shifted, soft dirt giving way to rough roots, then to patches of moss that had been smoothed over, as if someone had tried to erase their passage. The man didn't look back, but I caught the tremor in his step, the way his eyes flicked nervously to the shadows between the trees. Who are they? I asked, voice low, barely more than a whisper. The question felt foolish, but I needed to hear the answer, as if saying it aloud could make the threat more real, less vague. He hesitated, then nodded toward a narrow opening up ahead. They're the ones who've been taking people. The missing hikers. They don't want anyone talking. Not about the trail. Not about what happens here. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Why? What do they want? He glanced at me, eyes sharp now, calculating. Control. Power. Doesn't matter why. It's the same story everywhere. People who disappear, people who try to find the truth, they don't come back. The trail leads them somewhere they shouldn't, and then it doesn't let them go. We slipped through the opening, and the forest changed. The air grew denser, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. A faint metallic tang lingered, subtle but unmistakable. It caught me off guard like the scent of rusted iron, but too faint to place. I wondered if it was blood, but pushed the thought away. Not yet. Not here. The man stopped suddenly, crouching behind a thick cedar. His finger pressed to his lips. Silence. Complete silence, except for the distant drip of water hitting leaves somewhere far off. No birds. No rustling small animals. Just us and the weight of something unseen. I swallowed, my mouth dry. What now? He scanned the area, eyes sharp. We wait. They'll come. A dry twig snapped nearby. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might echo through the trees. The man's gaze snapped toward the sound. I caught a flicker of movement, something slipping between the trees, quick, deliberate. Not a deer. Not any animal I knew. Stay close, he whispered. Don't make a sound. We crouched lower, the ground cold and damp beneath my knees. The smell of the forest was stronger here, thicker, almost choking. I tasted it earthy, bitter, with a faint hint of smoke, though no flames burned nearby. The man's breathing was shallow but steady, mine was ragged, uneven, betraying the fight to stay calm. I caught a glimpse of something ahead, a crude wooden structure, half hidden by vines and moss, its jagged edges splintered and worn. The trail, or what was left of it, seemed to funnel toward this spot. I recognized it from the stories I'd read about missing hikers, some kind of trap or holding place. The thought made my stomach twist. Is that where they keep them? I whispered. He nodded. Some. Others. His voice faltered. They don't want witnesses. Suddenly, a low voice echoed through the trees. Not shouting, just a murmur, a conversation too quiet for me to catch the words, but urgent, tense. My skin prickled. The man's eyes darkened. He reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me backward. Not safe here. We moved again, slower this time, careful not to disturb the brittle leaves. The murmurs grew louder, more frequent. It was a small group, 2 or 3 voices, maybe more, moving with purpose. I glanced back at the wooden structure, then to the man. What do we do? He shook his head. We can't outrun them. Not like this. But maybe we can outthink them. My mind raced. Outthink them? How? We had no tool, no backup, just a fading flashlight and our own nerves. The forest around us seemed to pulse with quiet menace, every shadow a potential threat. I felt exposed, naked beneath the towering pines and tangled underbrush. The man crouched beside a fallen log, eyes scanning. There's an old hunting cabin a few hundred meters this way. Abandoned. Might be a place to hide, maybe find something useful. Useful like what? I asked, barely steady on my feet. Anything. A phone, a radio, something to call for help. Or at least stall for time. I nodded, grateful for any plan, even a slim one. We moved cautiously toward the cabin, the voices fading behind us but never entirely gone. The cabin was worse than I expected. Its wooden walls sagged, paint peeling like dead skin. The door hung crooked on lusty hinges, creaking softly in the breeze. Inside, the air, cold and heavy with silence, was thick with mold and the sour tang of rot. I could taste the dust, gritty and stale on my tongue. We stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath our weight. The man flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal scattered debris, old cans, broken furniture, a shattered mirror. Something glinted near the back wall. I moved closer and found a cracked cell phone, screen black but intact. No signal, of course. "Worth a shot," he muttered. Suddenly, a sharp noise of floorboards snapping underfoot. My head whipped around, heart hammering. The man froze, eyes wide. Someone else was here. Not a shadow or a trick of light. A real person. Someone breathing, moving slowly in the gloom. The tension knotted in my chest. "Who's there?" I called, voice steady but low. I stepped off the barely there trail for the last time. The ground beneath my boots had shifted once more, not in the way a fallen branch or a patch of mud might. This was deliberate, subtle, like the forest itself was nudging me, insisting I follow. The air was thick with the damp smell of rotting leaves and moss, so rich it almost felt alive. I could hear the distant drone of a creek, water tumbling over rocks, but it was faint, swallowed by the dense hush of trees that leaned in close, branches intertwined like fingers hiding something. Silence. Complete silence. I pressed on, muscles tight, senses sharpened. The forest had changed in ways I hadn't noticed before. The bark on the trees was scarred, as if scratched by something sharp but irregular. Not animal claws. Not human hands, necessarily. Just marks. A language I couldn't read. The faintest breeze carried whispers, or maybe my imagination was playing tricks. I told myself it was the wind rattling dead leaves, but my throat tightened anyway. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow despite the coolness. My hands trembled, not from cold but from the weight settling over me, a slow sinking feeling that maybe I'd gone too far. Too deep. I glanced back. The trail I'd come from had vanished, swallowed by undergrowth and shadows. A knot twisted in my stomach. Voices. There were voices, far off. Not loud, just murmurs, like a conversation held behind a curtain. My feet moved on their own before I could think it through. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear more or run away. The forest was drawing me in, step by reluctant step. I reached a small clearing, sunlight spilling weakly through the canopy. The air smelled different here, less earth, more something acrid, metallic. I knelt and picked up a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn. It was faded, torn, but unmistakably part of a jacket or shirt. I recognized the pattern, a plaid that matched a missing hiker's description I'd read about weeks ago. My breath hitched. This was real. The disappearances weren't just rumors or old tales. Someone, or something, was here. "Hello?" My voice cracked, swallowed by the thick air. I didn't expect an answer. Still, the silence that followed was oppressive, as if the forest was holding its breath too. Then, a rustling, not from the trees, but low, deliberate. Footsteps, slow and cautious. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. I scanned the edge of the clearing, the shadows pooling beneath the trees. A figure stepped out. Not the friendly face I'd hoped for. He was thin, eye starting like a cornered animal's. His clothes hung off him in tatters, and his skin bore the grime of days, maybe weeks, lost in the woods. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. Just watched me, wary and raw, You shouldn't be here, he said finally, voice hoarse. Neither of us moved. I wanted to ask where the others were, what had happened, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I swallowed hard and forced myself to speak. I'm looking for the missing hikers. I think I found something. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You don't want to find anything. Not really. This place. It doesn't let go. I took a cautious step forward. What happened to them? To you? His gaze flickered with something I couldn't place: fear, regret, maybe anger. People get lost. People get taken. Not by animals. Not by the forest. By others. The ones who know the woods better than anyone. They want to disappear. The words sank deep. A human threat, lurking in the shadows, preying on those who stray too far. I felt a cold wash over me, though the day was warm. I'm leaving, I said, voice firm even as my legs threatened to buckle. I'm not staying here. He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Good. You should. The forest changes. It shifts. It guides you where it wants. But some parts, they're traps. I glanced back toward the path I'd come from. It was still gone, swallowed by green and shadow. Panic rose, but I forced myself to breathe, to think. The ground beneath my feet felt solid now, steady, like it was finally settled. I followed the faintest line of crushed leaves, moving slowly, deliberately. The forest seemed quieter as I retraced my steps, the oppressive weight lifting just a little. The trail, invisible before, reappeared, thin and winding but unmistakable. I didn't look back. Not once. When I finally emerged from the trees, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the familiar dirt road where my car waited. The air tasted fresher, filled with the scent of pine and distant smoke from a campfire I couldn't see. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by exhaustion and something heavier: loss. I sat out of my car, staring back at the forest edge. The disappearing trail, the marks on the trees, the man with haunted eyes, they all lingered in my mind like a slow-burning ache. I thought about the missing hikers, about the lives that had been swallowed whole by this place, by the people who thrived in those shadows. I realized then that some mysteries don't want to be solved. Not fully. Some darkness is meant to stay hidden, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next unwary soul. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not surprising. I typed a message, fingers stiff. The trail moves. The forest leads you. People are out there. Be careful. I didn't know who would read it, or if it would make any difference, but it felt like the least I could do. As the sky deepened to twilight, I started the engine. The road stretched before me, open and real. I was leaving the forest behind. But part of me would never quite feel free. Some places get under your skin. Some trails never stop shifting. And some stories don't end, they simply wait for the next chapter to begin.